I wouldn't say tendency, it's more like a stance that I've chosen to develop, which is sort of always expect the worst so that you're not disappointed. And then when the worst doesn't come, great, you're happy. I don't have this kind of emotional attachment to anything when it comes to poker. All I think about is how should I play. I just do not care about all the other aspects.
Have you ever had to struggle with emotions as a poker player?
Oh, for sure, for sure. It wasn't such an easy ride. You're annoyed by running bad, you're annoyed by losing money, you're annoyed by someone you know who you don't think is good winning more money than you. You're annoyed by, oh, this guy's 3-betting me all the time. He must think I'm weak. Now I'm gonna prove him wrong. Upon spotting a mistake like that I should not have made, just like really convince myself, really solidify inside me why it happened, and making sure just take every measure it doesn't happen again. Understanding that poker is basically statistics, and you just have to follow the maps and play your strategy and click your buttons, and then things will come. Just not have an emotional attachment.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mechanics of Poker podcast. In today's episode, we will be chatting with Greek high-stakes MTT player Alexandros Theologis, aka Pwndidi online. Alex transitioned into poker after competing in various strategy games like chess, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dota, and Warcraft. He's been playing poker for over 10 years and is currently battling the highest stakes online. In this episode, we will talk through his journey and all lessons he learned along the way. But before we dive into today's episode, we have teamed up with some partners in the poker industry that in our experience can help boost your poker career. First one being Universal Poker. If you're playing online poker without a good rakeback deal, you are leaving free money at the tables. This is where our partnership with Universal comes in. Whether you're making a new account or want to boost your existing account, we can give you the best deals on the market. But what sets Universal apart in today's market is carefully selecting the sites that they want to work with, only collaborating with sites that have their shit together and offer clear lines of communication with the higher ups in the site. This line of communication makes them more like personal assistants for players rather than just affiliate, which adds a big boost to the deal in my opinion. Visit universalpoker.com, link in the description, and be sure to enter code MECHANICS to enter the exclusive deals we've arranged for our listeners. Universalpoker.com and enter code MECHANICS. Next is GTOWizard. If you're a frequent listener to the pod, you know that at least 90% of our guests use solvers to get ahead in the game, and GTOWizard is by far the best and most accessible tool if you want to use GTO to get ahead as well.
We are proud to announce a technological breakthrough. Introducing GTOWizard AI. This powerful technology can solve any custom poker spot in seconds to high accuracy. Unlike pre-solved solutions, this allows you to edit the solving parameters. That means you can modify the ranges, change the stack and pot sizes, customize the betting tree, and automatically simplify and optimize your bet sizes. Brace yourself. The meta is about to change.
So sign up to GTOWizard using the link down below, gtowizard.com/mechanics. Get 10% off on your first month and join the weekly coaching webinars, of which one every month is with me. Looking forward to educating you guys over there. But without further ado, let's start today's episode. All right, let's get started. Alex, there he is. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I am very humbled to be invited after having so many great names before me.
I wanted to start this pod off, Alex, at the beginning, as I saw that you have a history of playing various strategy games at a high level before you got into poker. You mentioned playing chess, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dota, Warcraft. Where did this interest in strategy games come from, and what is it that you most enjoy about competing in these type of games?
I guess it started from a very, very young age. I mentioned chess. I used to play chess when I was, I don't know, like 3, 4, 5 years old, some stupid age like that. I used to go to some clubs and whatnot. And yeah, ever since I was very young, I was always drawn into strategy games. And I think I just always enjoyed the intellectual stimulation, I guess. And also competing in intellectual sports always was more appealing to me than competing in like physical sports. So yeah, started with chess, then moved into some video games. As I mentioned, I used to play World of Warcraft competitively for a pretty long time, and also a little bit of Dota. And then Yeah, some Yu-Gi-Oh, which is kind of similar to poker, I guess, in the sense that it's a card game, physical card game. So yeah.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh is very similar to what's the other Magic, right? It's like a similar type of
Kind
idea.
of, yeah. I never play Magic, but I think it's very similar games, yeah.
When did you start? I think you also mentioned that you actually were like competing, going to tournaments for Warcraft. That was, I believe.
It was so. I used to play World of Warcraft at the highest level. This World of Warcraft isn't exactly tournaments. It's more like you get a group of 25 people and you try to do things faster than your competition. So it was this like massive online competition that would happen every few months, and I used to play in the best teams in the world. It was pretty much a full-time job as well.
So how does it look
yeah,
like to be a full-time Warcraft player?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was doing during my last years in school. Yeah.
So how does it like how does it look like the life of a full-time Warcraft player?
Well, spending a lot of time at home, of course, so for playing, and then also just getting to work from a pretty young age, I think wasn't something a lot of people were doing, but was also a kind of job that I enjoyed because obviously playing a game you like is pretty enjoyable. Kind of similar to poker, right? Same idea. You pick up a hobby and then you turn it into your job.
You mentioned that, yeah, go ahead.
Also, one quick fun story. As I told you, I used to be in some of the best teams out there. And World of Warcraft is owned by Blizzard. It's a very massive corporation. And every year it holds this meeting, I guess, where they showcase their new products and so on. And me and my team, we were invited. So like 5 people from my team went there. And the reason I'm mentioning this is a bit of a funny story. So some guy interviews us and they ask me my opinion of the latest updates. And I didn't really like it. And I was young and stupid back then. So I just immediately started trashing like, oh, this was just shit. This was terrible design. How did they come up with that? And this didn't go very well with them. And there's this YouTube interview somewhere out there of me just trashing Blizzard in their meeting.
And they're like, okay, we want some feedback, but let's at least remind ourselves to not invite Alex over next honest. time. This guy's too honest. Yeah. But I guess it also wasn't very constructive. It was more like, okay, let's just burn this update to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. As I said, young and stupid.
I was going to say, how
we didn't do it now, please sponsor.
What, like 13, 14?
Yeah, something like that, around 14, 15, I think.
Yeah, you cannot really expect a 13 or 14-year-old to give great constructive feedback. I mean, to be fair, it was kind of their own fault, in my opinion. I mean, what did they expect?
Let's blame them. I agree. I'm with you.
You mentioned that poker is kind of a combination of all previous games that you've played, which I thought was quite interesting. Could you maybe give us an example of like the crossover between the games that you played, right? You mentioned chess, you mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh, you mentioned Dota, Warcraft. What kind of similarities do they have with poker? How do they cross over?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I said that poker just combines everything because first of all, it's an online game for the most part. So it is very hand in hand with the video games I played. And a lot of the skills I acquired through my video game, I guess, experience also applies to poker, such as being able to play many tables and not losing my attention span and things like that. So gaming definitely helped with that. Then there's the strategy aspect, which I think is kind of similar to chess in the sense that there's the optimal move, and then you need to also figure out what your opponent is doing and so on. And then, of course, the card game aspect, which is kind of similar to Yu-Gi-Oh. So yeah, it's kind of funny how all three of my previous experiences in games led to poker.
What advantages did playing these games before have when you started playing poker? Did it give you a big head start, you think?
I would say in terms of playing video games, it definitely helps with playing long online sessions because, again, you can multitask better. You can manage like 15 tables at the same time way better if you have a gaming background, because in games, you need to be aware of many things at the same time. Oh, this is happening there, this is happening there. So this definitely just builds you up for playing long online sessions. And then for the strategy games, just learning to think in terms of game theory optimal approach. Just trying to figure out, okay, this will be better in the long term. This is what I should do.
Studying wise, like how do you study for, like I know chess I think is quite similar, or at least nowadays, probably not when you were playing chess, but nowadays I believe they also work with like solvers, right? They compare like the optimal move. It's very similar to like studying poker. the way you studied these other games, did it have a crossover? Where you're like, well, this is how I got better at Warcraft, so I'm gonna do exactly the same in poker.
So first of all, as you said, back then when I was playing chess, it wasn't that much studying. I mean, I was young as well, and also technology wasn't that advanced. But for studying for the games, I would say it's not. No, it doesn't relate to studying for playing poker that much. I wouldn't say so. Maybe for Yu-Gi-Oh, that makes sense because you had to test a lot of things and run some simulations and stuff like that. But definitely nothing related to poker and running all these endless HRC sims and whatnot.
So I can indeed see like the crossover between the games that you played. Was there anything about poker that made it very difficult for you to adjust to, right? You come from this background, you're a successful Warcraft player, you're like, okay, well, this poker thing can't be that hard. But did you have any, what were kind of the difficulties that came with the game of poker specifically when you transitioned?
So I would say the number one thing is variance, especially in tournaments poker. Having this extreme amounts of variance where no matter how well you play, even if you do the right thing every time, you can still be losing over a pretty long period. I would say this was the toughest thing to get used to. And it's a process. It's still a process for everyone, I think, going through big downswings, especially when you think you're doing things right. In all the other games, if you play good, you're rewarded pretty much. Whereas in poker, that's not necessarily related to each other. You can play good and not get rewarded, or you can play bad and then get rewarded. So yeah, I would say this was by far the toughest thing.
Do you recall any like first experience where you're like, oh shit, I didn't think this came with poker?
Honestly, no, it wasn't just one moment that led to this realization. It was just as I was playing more and more, and as it became more my job, I just started seeing it daily, where I would make what I thought was the right move, and then of course you don't get rewarded because it's variance, doesn't matter. But at the beginning, it's just a bit tough to get used to that and accept that. Another thing was the mathematical aspect of poker. I was never any good in maths at all. So just having to learn even basic things like pot odds and so on took me a while. I'm sure for most people it's nothing, but because I was, as I said, completely terrible at maths, it was a bit of a process.
I can join the camp of being a reasonably terrible at math. At some point, I feel like it also becomes more intuitive. I think also in tournament poker, math plays a little bit of a bigger role, or at least when I play a tournament, I feel like I'm calculating way much more things than if I'm playing a cash game where things flow a bit more intuitive, right? Like you don't actively anymore count outs, pot odds. It's more of an intuitive thing at some point, right? You kind of see like, I can see some good things going on here. And in your head, probably there's a calculation, but it turns into like an intuitive feeling of like, I should probably continue with this spot because I see good things happening. It's kind of then how I guess it gets translated.
Yeah, for sure. Because in tournaments, you also have all the extra things like, oh, ICM, risk premium, I need to add like 7% to my equity. And then, oh, a bounty tournament. So now I need to turn this bounty into equity. And yeah, definitely way more things to calculate in tournament than in cash games.
You mentioned that, when you realized that variance was a thing, you managed to recognize variance, which I think is definitely a skill that you need to learn when you play poker in the beginning, right? It's easy to just say, I'm just unlucky, blah, blah. But you actually recognize the fact that it was variance. And when you did recognize it was variance, how did you go about improving handling variance?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned, that understanding variance is a skill set, it definitely takes time when you get into poker, because in pretty much any other career, even if there is variance, it's not so visible, it's not so direct. Sure, in any career, in order to be very successful, you have to be lucky, have good timing, but it's not so clear as in poker, where you win the flip and you win $1 million, or you lose the flip and then you end up 10th place or whatever. So in poker, variance is way more brutal and direct. Now, I did, as you said, realize that, variance is just a very big thing in poker. And it really helped me just have a better time, I guess, and not really suffer through downswings. Because my main focus has been for a very long time, and still is, just playing well. Like, that's all I can control. I cannot control what my opponents do. I cannot control what the run out is. All I can do is just play as good as I can, study, improve constantly, and that's it. The rest will come. And it's also a bit tough to be, I guess, objective with yourself when you're winning, you're going to think you're playing well. When you're losing, you're going to think you're playing terrible. So this is also a skill that you need to develop, just being honest with yourself, whether you're playing well or just being lucky.
How does one develop that skill? Like, did you do anything like practically in order to improve in this, or you think it's just a matter of reinforcing over a long period of time? Like, this is not how I should think. This is how I should think.
Mm-hmm. I think it was more over a period of time because, okay, at the beginning you win, you think you're the best and so on, but then you go through a tough period, through a downswing, and that sort of humbles you because going through a downswing makes you doubt yourself more. So then you study more and then you discover more mistakes you're making that you weren't aware you were doing. So then once you go through this process that, oh, I'm making all these mistakes, I don't know, that's why I'm losing. So then you fix them and then you go on an upswing, but you still have this doubt in your head. Am I doing things right this time or am I still making mistakes? So for me, it was just this process of, at the beginning, I had a very high idea of myself and how I was playing. And then after the first few downswings, you get back down to earth and realize, no, you're still terrible at the game.
Yeah, it's the funny thing, right? With variance, how it can kind of you can put yourself on a pedestal, and then the next day you can really burn yourself to the ground and be like, wow, I'm so fucking terrible. Yeah, it's funny to see how even after many years, I mean, I know you've been playing poker for over 10 years. I've been playing poker for over 10 years. That still, sometimes you look back like, it's really, I fell for that again. I thought I was way better than I was, or I thought I was way worse than I actually was. It's like, how do I keep still falling for this shit? Do you have any like tendencies that you notice in yourself, for example, when you either are too overconfident because things are going well, or that you're too underconfident when things are not going your way?
I wouldn't say tendency. It's more like a stance that I've chosen to develop, which is sort of always expect the worst so that you're not disappointed. And then when the worst doesn't come, great, you're happy. So I'm going to give you a scenario. So let's say you are chip leading 1 out of 10 or something. A lot of people will be like, okay, let's go, let's win this tournament. My thought process will be like, okay, let's try not to get 9th. So right. I'm always expecting like the worst case scenario to happen. It doesn't affect how I play or anything about my game. It just helps me mentally deal with the worst scenario when it does come.
So you're basically hacking happiness. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, in a way, I guess so. It doesn't work for a lot of people because I've spoken about my approach with many of my colleagues, and it doesn't work for them. They need this motivation of, oh yeah, we're gonna win in order to play good. I don't need that, so it works for me.
Yeah, I can see this indeed go both ways. Adam, what is your take on this? Mr. Mindset Performance, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this one.
Well, yeah, I think if you can instill this mindset, it's a bit of a superpower because it allows you to focus on performance rather than outcome. So especially as tournaments get deep, as you run deep into tournaments, it's very easy to get excited about the big payoffs, the prize up top, and all of a sudden you're getting this excitement about what you could win. In reality, it's still a strategy game, still the same game. So if you can just be okay with the worst case scenario, it allows you to focus back in the moment and not care too much about what's going to happen. So yeah, I think it's quite a unique skill set, to be honest. I haven't heard many tournament players in particular master the skill, because you guys generally get a little bit of excitement for your big scores you can win. So, but yeah, I think it's definitely a strong mindset if you can install it.
Mm-hmm. Then when you do win, do you then allow yourself, because like obviously it's expectation to win, that's kind of the problem, right? Because then you can maybe not win. But then when you do get first or maybe second, how does that then feel, right? You can kind of let go of that mindset. Now it's really the case, you've won. Do you then let it all out, or how does that work?
Let it all out. No, I wouldn't say so. I would say that I'm a pretty humble winner as well. So I'm obviously happy when I win, but I also recognize that, okay, I won this tournament because I ran good, and I could have lost that flip and then gotten 7th or whatever. So yeah, I don't think you will ever see me like celebrate big time, like you see people on streams, like, jumping around, hitting the table, whatnot, because it's not like that. For me, it's just all about the strategy. So if I get the strategy right, then that's what I care about. Sure, winning money is great. Obviously, that's why I play the game. But yeah, I don't think you're going to see me jump around after winning.
Yeah, you know how it works, right? One tournament. So maybe if we zoom out further, and you look back over your career, for example, something that, we're going to be discussing throughout this podcast, right? Your whole career. If you then zoom out and see the progress that you make, I guess it's more of a long-term type of satisfaction feeling or like pride.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm definitely satisfied and I'm proud of what I've managed to achieve. I would say if you asked me a few years ago where I thought I would be today, it would have been at a lower level than I am. So yeah, I'm definitely proud of what I've achieved, but without turning into, I guess, obnoxious or arrogant or bragging or whatever.
That makes sense. Adam, I was wondering to kind of go back. Like I can think of, let's say you're number one and you have 10 players left. I sat next to a guy once in a live tournament where he was like, I think we were close to the bubble and he had a very good stack. And he kept on saying like, oh, the bubble is approaching, you know, probably I'm going to bubble. You see, I hate bubbles, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he kept on saying like kind of what Alex said, I'm trying to not finish ninth. Like, obviously, if it doesn't in fact affect your play, great. But I saw this guy, obviously, he bubbled because he kept on saying that how unlucky he was and he always bubbled. And then he indeed bubbled. You see where I'm getting at? Like, I can see that saying that you're going to win, you know, there's like this positive psychology movement where people are like, no, you should say that you're going to win. You should believe that you're going to win because then you're going to play in a way that you're going to win. How can that cross over if you have the mentality more of like, oh no, I want to be ninth? I know it works for Alex, but is there also like a dark side of the coin? Is I guess the question that I'm trying to ask you.
Well, yeah, I think what really matters is, are you focusing on playing your best poker, and is your mind clear enough to make good decisions? So this guy you mentioned, I'm guessing he's not playing great poker because all he's thinking about is busting out, bubbling. All that energy that could be spent on the strategy, picking up tells at the table, is now spent on the wrong things. So I think often when your expectations get out of sync, you get too excited, is the most common variety of this. You lose your attention on what you're doing. And I speak with a lot of MTT players who go, I played great until the final table. And I went, what happened on the final table? Oh, I started looking at the cash up top and I started getting excited, a bit nervous, and that then relays into how you play. So your strategy is downstream of that kind of excited feeling that you have. So yeah, it's a lot easier said than done. This is not a easy skill to go, I don't care if I finish ninth, I'm okay with it. $1 million up top, 100K for ninth, I'm okay with 100K. But I think it's a really, it's definitely better to be more on that side than on the overexcited side. So yeah, I definitely think there's a lot to be said about trying to instill that. I try to tell players a lot to, how do you lower expectations? So if you look at like how kind of your emotions play out, expectations minus reality, the gap in between is pain. So if expectations are, I'm going to win this tournament, and you come ninth, those 8 spots in between, you feel a lot of pain. You're like, the next day you crash, you feel disappointed, you feel down about it. So yeah, I think as much as possible, why not focus on your performance? Why not just keep playing the game? So it reminds me, there's a concept called finite games and infinite games. So finite games, you play to win. So if you're like, the finite game is, okay, final table, let's win this tournament, this is it. The infinite game is, I play just to keep playing. I enjoy the game. I enjoy being here. I want to play tomorrow. I want to play the next day. As long as I'm here, this is awesome. So the mindset's very different because you're just there to play. And often over the long term, people who play these infinite games, even in a finite game of poker, often do a lot better. So yeah, I think the mindset there is very clear in terms of which one wins. I think Alex's mindset overall, especially for you, Alex, because like you said, you can tell other people this, but they can't just install the chip of, I don't care. It's like a thing you've got to work through yourself. But I do think most players should work on low on expectations, especially at final tables for tournaments, just so they can play pressure free, they can enjoy the game and actually bring their best performance. All right, so Alex, I'm really keen to dive into your story now and your background from gaming and how that led you into the successful poker career. So talk us through when you decided that poker was going to be the game of choice, and talk us through those kind of initial steps into the world of poker.
Right, sure. So the way I started poker is in my second year of university, maybe first, I'm not sure. I was invited to a home game of poker by some friends. I didn't even know what poker was at that point. So I just read up on the rules in like 5 minutes, and then I went and played. So I found it interesting, entertaining. A strategy game, card game, what's not to like. And then a couple of days later, one of these friends was like, oh, let's go buy a pay-safe card for 10 euros and play online poker. Like, sure, whatever. So then we're both sitting there completely clueless, and we end up winning a tournament for like 1,000 euros or something, which at the time for a university student was just this insane amount, but I won in like 3 hours. Like, hold on a minute, there's actually money to be gained through the game I enjoy. So that's when I started looking more and more into it. And I saw that indeed there are people making a lot of money through poker. So then I just decided to devote myself to that. And I spent like 3 months just studying, not playing at all, understanding, pot odds, the basic game theory, just learning what the game is about. And then I slowly started playing. I gave up on my DJing job back then and went poker full time after a few months.
How did the impact of winning and losing money affect you? I'm guessing the other games you played didn't have that variable of winning and losing. And as you said, when you're a broke student, which I can relate to starting out, everything feels big. It's like, oh, like this could be a meal for me. This could be a night out with friends. How were you relating in the early days to the money aspect of the game you're playing?
Yeah, the first few months were pretty tough because, yeah, as you said, broke student. So I had to sacrifice quite a few things. I had to sacrifice, meals or going out or whatever in order to keep money to play the $2 poker tournament on PokerStars or whatever it was. So that was definitely a concern at the beginning. But then once I started building up a bankroll and I realized bankroll management, then things got quite a bit easier. So I would say once you get your first couple of thousand that you can spend in poker, then things become a bit easier for the money aspect, at least for me.
How long did it take you to get to that initial 2,000? And then what were the goals at that point when you got that first kind of comfort point? What were you aiming for at the start?
Yeah, so as I said, after that random $1,000 win that we split with my friend, then I spent just 3 months studying. And then I guess in the next 2 months or so, I was able to make my first couple of thousand. Back then it was way easier because the tournaments were just much, much bigger. For example, PokerStars would have like 10 tournaments below $5 every day, each giving like 3,000 please stop top. So you could make a lot of money through just one random tournament win, which isn't really possible nowadays, I think.
At which point did you start to think, wait a second, this maybe not just some side income, maybe I can like go full time and make this my career? When was that kind of shift towards a serious approach to poker?
Well, I would say pretty much right away. Once I won that first amount of money and then I researched and saw that there are people making serious money through poker, I said, okay, I can see this being my job. So then I spent these 3 months only studying. And then just straight away, just as I got into playing after studying, I was like, yeah, this can work. This can definitely work.
You mentioned that you had good bankroll management approaches. Talk us through what bankroll management looked like for you in those early days and how you were using some precaution to avoid big downswings.
Yeah, so back then there was some book, I can't remember the name. Yeah, because in that day you had to read books. That was the way to study poker. You didn't have that many online tools as you do now. So you had to read like some guy called like Super Whale or Whale something had a pretty good book. Anyway, I don't remember what, but there was some book about bankroll management and saying how many binds you would need based on how tough the fields are and so on. So I used that, but I'm a bit blank on the details right now. But right now we have way better formulas to calculate variance and bankroll management, like Prime Dope or whatever the site is called, and some other sites.
Do you have some loose guidelines, rules of thumb that the audience could take away in terms of how to think about bankroll management for MTTs, or is there not too many variables to simplify that?
Sure. So some things to keep in mind when deciding has to be, of course, how tough the tournament is, but then also one very misunderstood part is how many runners the tournament has. The less amount of people that play the tournament, the less money you need to play it, because you're just going to win more often. If I play a sit and go, I'm going to win 1 out of 9 times. So I don't need to have that much money to play the tournament. Whereas if I play the Sunday Million, which has, 5,000 runners, 10,000, whatever it has, well, my bankroll requirement will be pretty high for that because I'm just going to lose very, very often. So I think this is a very misunderstood aspect of bankroll management, how many people play the tournament. Of course, the more people that play it, usually the softer it will be, but still there's always a sweet spot where, yeah, we just need a lot more money to play the big tournaments.
How does it also affect your mindset when you're playing like the deep field tournaments a lot? Let's say your schedule's mainly big runner tournaments. Obviously, you're going to go on long streaks of not winning. Have you ever had that kind of grind where you haven't had any lower fields and you've had longer streaks of not winning? And how is that to deal with on it from a mindset perspective?
Yeah, for sure. For sure, I've had that. Not anymore now because now I play mostly smaller fields, but through my career, most of my time I've been playing big field tournaments. And exactly, as you said, because of the high variance there, you can just be losing constantly for very long periods of time. I mean, beating a field of 2,000 people is just really tough to do. You're not going to do it very often. And again, this just comes back to realizing variance and realizing that you may be doing everything right, but you're still going to lose because that's how the game works.
Yeah, so for you, it seems quite simple that you don't really buy into variance too much. You're aware of its role. You're aware how it plays into like the kind of win and loss in. But like sometimes day to day, month to month, it can feel very challenging to like just keep showing up when you're not winning. So you mentioned for you, the most important variable is playing well. So for you, how do you define that you're playing well? Because I think a lot of players struggle with this because when they're winning, it's easy. It's like, oh, I'm winning, things are going well. But let's say you're losing for a prolonged period of time. Maybe you haven't got the chip EV to kind of back it up. And it's really hard to know, like, am I playing well? Am I deluding myself? Is this variance? Or have I crossed over to being a bad poker player? So how do you kind of define playing well? And what are the things you look for to make sure you're playing well during bad patches?
Mm-hmm. So this has just to do with detaching yourself from the emotions of the game. Like whether you win or lose doesn't really come down to you in terms of a short period of time. So just going through your hands and studying and studying and studying and being objective and also getting opinion from other people. That also helps. Having a good study group around you of people who are at your level or at a higher level and who will be honest with you definitely helps. But I would say the number one thing is to just try and be honest with yourself and just review and study a lot. Your routine shouldn't change if you win or lose. You should study the same and do the same things. Winning doesn't mean you're playing better, and losing doesn't mean you're playing worse than you did a year ago, for example.
Great advice. So you built your bankroll to a few thousand, you've got a bit of comfort, you're enjoying the game. Talk us through the kind of next progression for you. First of all, what were your expectations then? You've already decided that, okay, wait a second, this could be my full-time thing. Talk us through like how you were aligning your goals, expectations of poker, and how you were kind of progressing at this stage.
Sure. So after maybe a year or a couple of years of playing, I was moving up and building up my bankroll and playing higher and higher. But I had this feeling that I wasn't winning as much as I should be winning because I thought I was playing better than my results were indicating. So I moved a bit higher and that didn't go well. And that was when I went through my first very big downswing. During some series, I think it was 2017, maybe, something like that. I'm not exactly sure on the year. I ended up losing like half my bankroll during one of the big series events. So during Scoop, yeah, that was pretty painful, of course. And then that was also a bit of a reality check. Like, okay, maybe you're not right. Maybe you think you're playing better than you are. So that's when I decided to look for coaching and get a second opinion from someone that is crushing my stakes and crushing higher stakes. And maybe they can tell me what they think of my play. And funnily enough, the person I chose to coach me back then was Jans Graftekel, who you had on the podcast a while ago. And yeah, having a session with him was very eye-opening because I just found out so many things I was doing wrong, but I had no idea about. Finding out your leaks back then was way harder than it is now. There is so much free material now on the internet, and so many like live streams and whatnot. But if you're doing something wrong, chances are you're gonna figure it out. Someone is gonna do something different, and you're gonna figure it out. Back then, it was way harder, and coaching was one of the only ways for someone to tell you that, yeah, you're doing this wrong. So I would say that was extremely eye-opening for me. And after coaching with Graftekel, I decided to join BitB, which was a stable back then with really high-level coaches. And I think that was like the big jump in my career, the moment where I went from playing and doing fine in mid stakes to moving up in high stakes and doing very well there.
What do you think led to that big jump? Was it being around good players, getting their inputs, hearing their thoughts, them reviewing your game and giving you insights? What were some of the big things that you felt for you personally allowed you to make that jump being part of a good coaching group?
Upon joining BitB, you had to sign a contract which said that you were committed to them for 18 months, 1.5 years. And this is a really big commitment to share half of your profits for 1.5 years with someone. So I decided that if I was to accept this deal and join the stable, I would make the absolute maximum I could out of it. I would watch every single video. I would like drain every piece of information they had available for me. Back then, we had many great coaches. It had Romeo Pro, it had Graftekel, of course. It had Sikwan, Ben CB, it had Oxoda, just so many great players. Apotheosis, yeah, just amazing players. And they would all do weekly or monthly sessions, and there was a big video library. So I would spend hours upon hours of watching everything, every little thing I could, and just, yeah, like a sponge, just absorb everything I could. Another thing that I think helped me is that I've always been pretty competitive in my nature. So upon joining BitB, I would of course play the lowest stakes they offered because I was very new. And I would look at their roster and be like, huh, I have this guy tagged as a fish. Why is he playing higher stakes than me? Or, oh, this guy, I know he's a bad rig. Why is he like in tier 1? Why is he playing the highest games? So this would just give me a lot of motivation to prove that I'm better than them, to become better than them, and move above them. Which it's a bit toxic maybe, but it's just motivation.
Whatever activates you to get going, I think, is good fuel. I think sometimes we can glorify motivations. I think competition is a great motive to want to better yourself, beat other people in a competitive environment. Poise a competitive field, to see your opponents, even peers, as rivals that you want to beat. I think is a healthy thing. So yeah, talk us through like the kind of climbs you made. So before joining BitB, what was your average buy-in? And talk us through the levels you were climbing. And what are the main kind of jumps for MTT players? What are the main kind of criteria where you're going, I'm progressing into a next level of buy-ins or game strength? What are some of the big ones that come to mind?
Mm-hmm. So before joining BitB, I used to play average buy-in around 100, maybe, something like that. And then when I joined, I had to move down to maybe 60 or something, because that was the lowest tier when you join the stable. And I remember I was actually a bit upset by that. I wanted to play some games that I played on my own, but they wouldn't allow me to play. And there was a bit of, I guess, conflict in the beginning where I was trying to convince them to let me play higher, and they said, not yet, in a while. So yeah, I dropped to about half my average buy-in for a while. But thankfully, quickly, I was able to prove I was better than they thought, and I moved up to playing higher again. Now, as for any big immediate jumps, I think it was just a process. It wasn't like, oh, now I won this tournament, so I can play that. It was after every few months, they were reviewing their horses, and they were deciding who gets to play in which tournaments and what level you were at. So I was just constantly on the rise, moving up. Yeah, I don't think there was one like specific moment where, oh, from now on, I can play higher.
Yeah, it's that progression, just every day chipping away, learning, studying, getting a bit better. Where when you look back in a year's time of doing that every day, you're like, oh, I've come quite far. It wasn't like a big jump, but every day was like a step towards that. So you mentioned in the questionnaire we sent to you that discipline and hard work is what sets you apart. And even this conversation so far, I'm getting this kind of strong work ethic, trying to outwork people, but also dedicated to your craft. So yeah, talk us through like what discipline and hard work looks like for you in terms of the early days of poker, or this progression period. Talk us through like how your days were structured, and how do you feel like you were either working harder or more disciplined than the competition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot to talk about here. So first, about discipline, one part of discipline is also that I've never had gambling tendencies in any way, even maybe a bit funny coming from a poker player, but outside of poker, I've never gambled anything, and even in poker, I don't have any gambling tendencies at all. It's all just theory, GTO, or play as good as you can. The result doesn't matter. Like nothing, no emotional attachment, as I said before. It's just my job where I have to click the correct button. That's it. That's poker for me. As for working hard, yeah, it all came from utilizing every moment in BitB because of how much I had to give up to join them. And then after that, it became sort of routine, I guess, where it's unacceptable to me to have a spot I'm not sure of and not run it, not find out the answer. Figuring out the answer is the fun of poker for me. Like solving the puzzle and yeah, figuring out the strategy. That's what I really enjoy about poker. Excuse me. Now, as for outworking others, I think a lot of other people that I've spoken to have trouble committing long hours into studying. They need to have like this very strict program of, okay, now I'm going to study 2 hours, then I'm going to do this for 1 hour, then I'm going to play for 5 hours. And that's not how I work. Let's say today I'm going to study PKOs or whatever, or some three-way scenario, or I don't know. I'm going to study for 10 hours if I have to until I've reached my goal, like until I've achieved what I want to achieve. So it's not so much, oh, today I'm going to study 2 hours. It's today I'm going to study this topic, however long it takes.
What allows you to have that mental endurance to put in these bigger sessions? Because as you mentioned, a lot of players will do these shorter study sessions, 1 hour, 2 hours. They will feel quite drained after it, and they'll maybe take a break, do the grind separately. But most players would struggle to replicate that kind of, I'm going to do a full day of studying this thing till I get the answers. So what do you think allows you to spend so much time on your study topics?
Mm-hmm. I think a few things. First of all, of course, me enjoying the actual strategy aspect of the game, like figuring out the strategies, is like a big aha moment for me. I feel good then. I feel good learning new spots, and when it comes to execution, knowing what I should do in the spot. It's just a really big source of, I guess, satisfaction for me. Then also it has to do with determination, I guess. Wanting to achieve your goals, wanting to get to where you want to go, you have to go through the hoops. You have to spend the time. I would say these are the two main reasons.
You structure your days. If you're somebody who is able to study for very long periods, I'm sure there's times where you can just get lost in studying and maybe not get your grinding hours in. So talk us through how you're able to be consistent with your grinding and also like make time blocks for studying. I'm wondering for you how this works in terms of your daily structure or weekly structure. Where do you study and when do you fit time for grinding if you're able to kind of go very long periods for both of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm generally not the type of person that structures their day. I don't have like a schedule for the day. Oh, now I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do that. Obviously, if I have something set up, like today I had the podcast or tomorrow I'm going to have a coaching session, obviously that has to be scheduled. But in general, I avoid setting like time schedules, time zones for each day. As for sorting out my grinding and my playing, right now it comes a lot in periods. So you have the months where you are grinding nonstop, and then you have the months where there's not much to play, so you spend it mostly by studying. Another thing that I'm almost always doing is I don't combine studying and grinding days. So for example, I'm going to be grinding on, let's say, Sunday, Thursday, and Tuesday. And then the rest of the days I'm going to be studying or coaching or doing whatever. I'm not going to have a day where, oh, I wake up, then I study 3 hours, and then I play. Because I found that for me, studying before playing just exhausts me. I want to jump into the session fresh without having worked already beforehand.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that kind of clarifies for me how you're able to do these kind of marathon study sessions without worrying about when you're going to grind. Because yeah, as you said, you separate the days. So it's a study day. It's like, okay, I can go as long as I need to get the answers because this is the nature of the day. And then on your grinding days, there's little or no studying. So again, you can put all your energy into that. For you, how do you avoid, let's say, burnout in terms of if you're so interested? So I'm guessing you love solving problems, you get really into studying and even grinding. Talk us through like how you get balance in your kind of days and weeks to avoid burning out, because it's very tempting to overdo stuff, to put long sessions in of grinding and studying. I'm sure around series as well when there's big tournament demands going on. How do you avoid burnout, or do you have any challenges there?
Mm-hmm. Until recently, I've never really had issues with feeling burnt out, because maybe it goes back to gaming, but playing for like, I don't know, 10 hours a day, that was normal for me when I was playing video games, and that's normal for me when I'm playing poker. So I don't feel tired or burnt out through that. It's just a day's routine for me. Recently, though, in the past series, which was Scoop, I actually felt burnt out for the first time. GG had this leaderboard thing where I somehow ended up competing in because I was lucky to run good at the beginning. And it was a really big leaderboard. So the AV was definitely worth spending more time into it. So I ended up grinding every single day for like 35 days in a row without taking a single day off. And what's even more, I guess, exhausting on top of that is that GG had the first tournament starting in the afternoon at like 3 p.m. and the last tournament starting at 3 a.m. So no matter how bad your session went, you had to spend at least 12 hours playing. So this was the first time that I actually felt really burnt out, because it was just extremely long hours for a super long time. And yeah, I decided I'm just not really going to go for these leaderboards anymore, even if the AV is very high, because it doesn't really please me to force myself to play. But other than that, I haven't really experienced burnout in my career, only now, which was, I guess, forced in a way upon me.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's not your normal approach to grinding. You normally play when you want to. It sounds like you're someone who loves studying, which probably like recharges you in between your grinding days. And if you was like put all your hours into grinding on this 35 days in a row, which sounds pretty intense, I can imagine that's a very different approach to your usual kind of more balanced approach to poker.
Yeah,
so you mentioned.
For sure.
You mentioned in the conversation and in the questionnaire that I view poker simply as my job, no ego, no feelings, no gambling tendencies, just looking for the highest AV strategies. And I thought this was really powerful in terms of a strong mindset to instill, but also very hard to get to this point. So for you mentioned, we'll start with no ego. Talk us through, like, as an MTT player, you guys get a lot of praise for winning. You guys get a lot of peer reviews as being good players. You get the big prizes, the trophies. Talk me through like how you have avoided building an ego around winning, especially when you're competitive. You mentioned you like beating people. How do you feel like you've kept the ego at bay, so to speak, throughout this pursuit?
Yeah, that's not very easy for me to point out. Maybe it's just a character trait of mine. But sure, I am happy and I am proud when I win and of my achievements. But at the same time, I haven't built up an ego at all. But what I meant more in that comment about keeping my ego at bay is that I'm never going to think like, oh, this guy is owning me. Oh, this guy is after me. Oh, now I'm going to go after this guy. Or, oh, how does this guy win? He's so bad. Stuff like that. This is more what I meant in terms of ego. Like I've completely abolished that. I don't have this kind of emotional attachment to anything when it comes to poker. All I think about is how should I play. I just do not care about all the other aspects.
Have you ever had to struggle with emotions as a poker player?
Oh, for sure, for sure. It wasn't such an easy ride. I think like most players, when you first get into tournaments, all these things start annoying you. You're annoyed by running bad. You're annoyed by losing money. You're annoyed by someone you know who you don't think is good winning more money than you. You're annoyed by, oh, this guy's 3-betting me all the time. He must think I'm weak. Now I'm going to prove him wrong, or whatever thought process. And slowly, I think you just get over these things by playing more and more and just understanding how the game works. You just completely move over these things.
Yeah,
but
you
it
said
definitely wasn't from day one that, oh, yeah, I just don't care.
Yeah, so you were experiencing the normal human emotions. I'm just checking that you've got the pulse there. Things are working. That's good. But you mentioned that you just go past them, and I feel like for you that might be true, but a lot of players don't just move past them. They keep these emotions. They keep these bitter feelings, labeling opponents, feeling that frustration when things aren't going their way. So for you, can you remember the time when you noticed that you weren't experiencing as much emotions? What do you think were the kind of the clicks in your mind or subconsciously that allowed you to stop seeing things personally, to allow yourself to experience less emotions? What were some of the main things that come to mind there?
It was an over time process where I just realized it's not productive. It doesn't lead to anything positive. It would only make me feel worse and make me more upset, more angry, whatever it may be. So then when you are experiencing emotions that aren't productive at all, you just need to work into abolishing them and just not experiencing them anymore. And again, it was a process. It went over time. It's not that from one day to another, it was like, I shouldn't get upset anymore. Now I'm not upset. No, it of course wasn't like that. But yeah, gradually over time, it started bothering me less and less and less. And to this point, I think it just doesn't bother me almost at all.
Yeah, I think by now
I'm sorry I don't have any specific words of wisdom to provide. It's just, a gradual process that worked for me.
No, that's good. I've obviously put a lot of hours in to your craft. And sometimes along that journey, things just start to piece together. And it might not be like a pivotal thing that happens in terms of, I changed this and then that unlocked this next chapter. Sometimes it's just like, all right, I just got exposure to this stimulus. I realized it wasn't helping me. And I found a way to, over time, get more and more desensitized to what was happening. So for you, it sounds like it was more the latter there. Now, I'm curious to know about your relationship to risk and gambling. So you mentioned no gambling tendencies. So the first question that pops off my head is, what attracted you to tournaments when you don't have this kind of gambling tendency? And then how do you think about risk in terms of how much risk you're willing to take, or when you have opportunities? I'm sure in your world right now, there's lots of opportunities of tournaments you can play, whether it's live, online, different range of buy-ins that you can choose to take on more risk for certain series, for example. How do you think about risk, and what do you think about when you're trying to make decisions?
Yeah, so first about what attracted me to tournament poker. The truth is, it just happened to be the part of poker that I started playing, because that's what my friends played when they introduced me to the game. So then I started playing tournaments, I studied tournaments, and I became good at tournaments. And there's no easy answer to that. Should I have switched to cash games at some point? Maybe, but every time I thought about switching, I thought I was already way too deep into tournaments to just give up all that knowledge and start playing another game. Because comparing tournaments to cash games, there are many different things, I guess, you need to know for each of the two games. Cash games just 100 big blinds. Tournaments, you kind of never play 100 big blinds. So yeah, I guess it's not that I specifically chose tournaments for a reason. I just happened to start playing tournaments, and I stuck with them ever since. Now, as for taking risks, I would say I'm generally not a very big risk taker. I will always just use the BRM formula to decide how much to keep of my action, how big should I play, and things like that. I will very rarely take a shot and keep more than I should, maybe on some random main event, but it's not something I do very often. I want to be careful and precise with how I spend my money and how much risk I take.
Do you pre-decide before a series in advance what sort of tournaments you're going to be playing, and then you decide what kind of risk you're willing to take on? And does that deviate from like series to series? Do you like, as you had a good series, do you up your kind of average buy-in, so to speak, or do you keep it somewhat static for long periods?
Depends on Bitcoin price. No, I usually do decide before the series exactly what my schedule will look like, and I don't really change it unless, I don't know, I happen to win 10 tournaments and then I will have more money. So then I will be able to keep a higher action of myself and buy back some pieces or whatever. But yeah, I always decide beforehand, and I don't let like my feelings of the day affect how I'm going to play, just the schedule I have and what I should do. And in terms of changing how much or how high I play between series, again, I would say it just depends on how my bankroll is looking. Like how I did the previous series, actually how crypto is doing, which because I have a fairly big allocation there. I said it as a joke, but it is a consideration. So yeah, again, just depends on how I'm doing financially.
How do you deal with making mistakes? So you mentioned you're someone who just looks for the highest AV strategies. Great when that's working well and you're playing good poker. But when you're not playing well or mistakes are creeping in, how do you generally deal with those? What are some of the kind of things you either tag the hands, go for study sessions, or even on an emotional level, how do you generally process mistakes?
I think it's a very interesting topic. So I generally am quite harsh on myself with mistakes, but I tend to rank them in terms of whether a mistake is acceptable or not. For example, let's say you jam 7 deuce offsuit under the gun. Well, that's something you should know better. You shouldn't do. So then where do you draw the line of a mistake that you should know better? Obviously, let's say I call a jam 1 pip too wide. Well, that's fine. It's an acceptable mistake. You're not going to know every ICM spot perfectly, sure. But then what if you call 2 pips too wide or 3 pips too wide? Where do you draw the line where you're like, no, you should have known better. Like, it's your job. You need to be better than that. And it's the latter type of mistakes, like the mistakes that I should have known better, which bother me the most. Because they're mistakes that even studying them doesn't matter too much, because it's such a big mistake that you should just have known better by now. And yeah, I tend to be quite strict on myself when I make mistakes. It's the number one thing, I guess, that annoys me in poker is when I make a mistake that I shouldn't have made. Of course, it happens and you get over it. But my approach with mistakes is quite a bit different than some other people you've had, like Sam, for example, who who went to accepting just mistakes and being like, yeah, oh, well, live and learn. Yeah, I'm not like that. I'm way more harsh and critical of my mistakes and dive a lot more deeper into why did it happen, how can I prevent it from happening again, and just studying the sport in much more detail.
Yeah, I was wondering where it goes into like the practical application of learning from that mistake. I always find it interesting when people say like, I shouldn't have made that. I should know better. Because like the fact you've made the mistake kind of implies that you didn't know better, and it's just like a judgment that I shouldn't have this in my game because I said so, because I've done enough work on this and it shouldn't be there. So for you, like you mentioned, you're a bit critical on yourself and you use that kind of energy to go deeper on the spot, understand it better. So let's say you make a mistake, it's a big one, and your mind labels, I shouldn't have done that, that was a bad mistake. Talk us through like the process you go through when you're a bit annoyed at yourself to make sure that mistake doesn't happen again. Do you go deeper into solvers? How do you learn that lesson so it doesn't happen again?
So first of all, I have to figure out why I made the mistake. Is it a mistake that I knew and just failed to execute, or is it indeed something that even upon reviewing, I was like, yeah, I didn't know that was the correct play. And depending on which of the two factors caused me to make the mistake, I will approach it differently. If I knew the mistake, like I knew how I should play, but ended up making a mistake anyway, then I just need to dive into why did I not have the correct thought process? Why did I skip a thinking step? Was I playing too many tables? Was I tired? Was I distracted by something, doing something else? Just really trying to nail down why it happened and making sure it just does not happen ever again. This kind of mistake could be, for example, a misclick in a live tournament or something like that, which is something you should know better, but then because you were distracted or missed something, you ended up making a big mistake. Sorry, what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say for you, what are some of the most common reasons why you end up making mistakes that let's say you know the strategy in the spot, but you've looked back and went, that was a mistake because I didn't execute in real time. Or let's say you were tired or you were distracted. How do you then prevent that happening again? Because I think a lot of players struggle with this where they almost get in this like repetitive cycle where they're like, I should know better, but I didn't. Then they make the mistake again and go, well, I should know better this time. And almost creates a cycle of like, they should know better, but they don't. So how do you kind of instill in your mind or learn the lesson valuably, so like next time you're in that situation, the ratio of that mistake or probability of that mistake goes down next time?
I think it just comes down to, as I said, having very high standards of myself and being very strict with myself. So upon spotting a mistake like that I should not have made, I just really try to, how do I say it exactly? Just like really convince myself, really solidify inside me why it happened, and making sure just take every measure it doesn't happen again. Let's say that I timed out on a table because I was looking at my phone. Random example, right? I'm not saying it happens, of course it doesn't, but just a random example. Well, then I'm never going to have my phone on the table ever again in my life when I play poker. So it just has to be like really drastic measures. Once a mistake happens that shouldn't have happened, to never allow it to happen again. For example, in the latest Trident that I played, just a bit of a story time, I was pretty deep in the tournament. We were maybe 30 people left, something like that. We were in the money at that point, so just really deep in the tournament. And some short stack goes all in from middle position. I think it's folded to me in position 1, to the left of the dealer. So I declare I'm all in. But then the person to the right of the dealer, position 8, he has cards. I didn't see it because the dealer is in between. And then he ended up having a hand that busted me. So anyway, I lost there. And this was a mistake that should not have happened. I should be aware that the person to the right of the dealer still has cards. So what I've done now, besides, of course, pay much more attention to the table, is every time there is like some sort of significant action before me and it's my turn to act, I always ask, like, has the other position folded, but I cannot see? And it is annoying, but it's just a process that I have to go through to make sure this mistake never, ever happens again. I'm just going to be like 1,000% sure every time that the person I cannot see has folded. Just as an example. So this is, the first type of mistake. And then we go to the mistake where it's a big mistake, but I didn't know any better about it. And that's just a signal that you need to study this spot in much more detail. And then I'm going to spend as many hours as it takes to just familiarize myself a lot more with the spot.
Yeah, it's this very high standard you've got there where the mistake becomes a very big signal to go, right, I need to learn from this. This can't happen again. Either I need to learn the strategy to get better, or a lot of times I need to execute my strategy better, and I need to take every measure I can to make sure this has been a valuable learning experience. So yeah, I think for you, it's you must learn very quickly, because I think a lot of players, one of the frustrations that I hear players relate to me is they're making these mistakes that they should know better, but then they keep coming up. It's like been weeks and months, and this mistake's still creeping into their game, and they've kind of lost confidence that they're going to be able to eradicate it. But for you, because you've got this kind of frustration with yourself, but also very high standards, you're like, this has never happened again. If it happens once, I'm going to learn this lesson, and I will make sure I don't repeat this mistake. So I'm guessing for you, even though it's painful, you gain a lot of confidence in yourself over time that you're going to find these mistakes, you're going to eradicate them, and you're going to be leveling up for all your sessions you play. Yeah,
exactly. And I've turned this like strictness with myself into something positive, I think, to just make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes.
There's a donkey and a shark on the wall behind you. Do they represent anything to you?
They are. It represents my two sides of playing poker. No, in truth, I just found it, I saw them in a shop and I thought they would be funny additions to my office because of what they represent in poker. But in a more, I guess, poetic way, I have this as a background for when I'm doing coaching and so on, because you can turn from the donkey, where is it? There it is, to the shark. And yeah, it's just, I think, a nice little addition to the room.
I like it. I think it fits well. Like you said, it's one of those, any situation in life, but in poker in particular, you can be the donkey or the shark and switch between the two very quickly. And yeah, the donkey's got a lot to learn. The shark's got a lot to kind of take advantage of. But yeah, I think it's a good little reminder there. It's also a little playful thing to have on the wall. Yeah. Especially
also a reminder that the distance between them isn't that big. Like going from donkey to shark, right? It's not.
That's deep. We're going deep. yeah. You've thought about this. It's not just a tie on the wall. There's a hidden meaning here. I thought there might be. Because normally when you have something on the wall, sometimes it starts with one thing, and then over time you start to create a narrative around it that makes it more powerful for you as you're seeing it every day. So yeah, interesting. All right, Rene, for you, how do you process mistakes these days? I know you don't play as much right now, so I'm guessing it's more challenging for you when you do make mistakes, maybe having to accept that you're not going to put as much time into to working on them. So how do you process mistakes and try to learn from them the same way Alex does?
Yeah, I'm definitely more in the, I was in the Alex camp before, but for me personally, that didn't really work. Also, I feel like it's an endless cycle because you always make mistakes. Because what you now maybe not see as a mistake in the future when you improve as a player is a mistake. So I came to at some point just realize this, and mistakes is just going to be part of it. I do obviously make note and be like, hey, interesting, I made this mistake. What can I do to improve? But especially in the moment itself, I might identify, oh yeah, I have more tables than I normally play. Therefore, I now made a mistake that I should not make. But I'm a bit more in your camp, what you said, should not make. Well, I did make them, so I should probably expect to make them. So it's mainly my expectation that I should align instead of like my realistic view of myself and how much I'm capable of playing this game in this specific moment, right? I don't know how many tables I had open. I don't know how much I slept. I don't know how much bad beats I got. I don't know how much, you understand? Like, I don't know how frustrated I was at that moment. There's so much variables that I found it more useful to take a more compassionate route and be like, I made this mistake. The first thing, obviously, is more like the ego side. That's like, I shouldn't be making this. You should be better than that. But I can quickly kind of overturn it. Well, apparently not. And then off game, try to feel like, okay, what can I do about it? I feel like my off game process is very similar to Alex, but in game, I've not found it very useful to be too critical of myself in order to, because it would influence how I play. And I feel like a lot of things that Alex has been explaining so far, it doesn't really influence his decisions in a hand next to this hand. But for me, if I start to get frustrated about a mistake that I should not be making, it definitely influences the way I play the next hand. So for me, the compassion route is needed because else I will just screw up my session. For example, I always had like this in my primer. I would try to come up with the response that would allow me to continue my session in a high ZV way as possible. And for me, that's not being critical at myself. Does for you, it doesn't influence, I assume, how you play the rest of your session, right, Alex? From what I'm hearing so far in this conversation.
If anything, I think it helps me play better. Let's say I make a big mistake. I'm going to be like, yeah, let's not be stupid from now on. Like, focus more, play better, do better. This was not a mistake we should have made. So let's not make any more mistakes like that. So yeah, if anything, to me, it helps me do better the rest of my session instead of pushing the other way.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. No, but I definitely agree. For example, if I made a mistake because I was talking to some guy on Discord while I was playing, yeah, I should probably not do that, right? So that's something actively that I can remove. Or, I was just being tired because the night before I went to bed way too late, even though I know I was going to play, and I drank too much beer, blah, blah, blah. These are all things that I can cut out, easy fixes. But then at some point, I feel like there's just mistakes left because, there was a huge will in the game, and therefore I continued playing longer than I normally do. Well, okay, then I kind of align expectations. Well, I'm playing longer now, or I'm playing more tables because the circumstances, they kind of ask for it. I'm going to make, for example, I played in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and I play live poker, once a year? Chances are I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to misread chips. I'm going to throw in the wrong chip sometime. Actually, no, I don't think I threw in any wrong chips this trip. So that's good. But for example, I accidentally almost mucked the winner. These are kind of things that kind of are, for me, also I don't take it too serious. I'm just there, 2 weeks, once a year. That's kind of the live poker that I play. Like I'm not gonna make I'm not gonna be too hard on myself in that environment. I was wondering, how do you go about, like, you've identified a leak that's strategical. You mentioned, okay, well then I have to fix it. How does the process of identifying your leaks and fixing your leaks look like for you?
Mm-hmm. The most important thing for me is to try to get the general picture and not look into this very specific hand in question. So let's say, for example, I ended up jamming too wide on the button or something. I'm not just going to look at this specific spot. I'm just going to look in the overall strategy of the ICM surrounding the button. How wide should I jam in every spot? What factors lead me to that? And just try to get as the general picture, not the specific spot. Whether that is through running scripts for many different board textures or simulating many similar scenarios. My number one focus is just understand the reason why and not the specific spot. And I think this is very, very important because you're almost never going to get the exact same spot twice in poker. It's going to be extremely rare, but you're going to have the exact same position, same stack size, same board, same everything. So understanding similar ones and understanding the concept behind it and why you made your mistake in general is going to be way more productive than just solving this specific scenario.
Do you have a recent example that you can share with our audience?
A recent example.
The one that stands
sure.
out to you?
Sure. So it was maybe about a year ago or something, because it's just the one I remember, maybe not too recent, but and I was playing online against someone that I respect a lot, and it was an ICM situation. We were maybe final two table, something like that. And anyway, he defends the small blind, and then he leads out on a flop that I thought there was no leading, and then I ended up misplaying against that lead. So when I saw it, I was like, what the hell is this? Why does he get to lead on this board? And then I ran the spot and I see that, yeah, no, he's actually supposed to have a lot of leads here. So then I identified an area of the game that I wasn't familiar with. So what I did is I ran maybe 50 different scripts of different ICM scenarios and like hundreds of flops for each scenario, and try to find out exactly when does the small blind get to have a lead, which boards is it, exactly what need to be the parameters of the stacks and the risk premium levels, and just, yeah, try to understand the whole game tree and why it happens.
So that then basically the next time, and you can now incorporate that, right? That's something that's useful. And when someone, I guess also when someone does not lead a board that he's supposed to lead, you now understand. So when he does not lead, you can check back a bit more. And when they do lead, you now don't go bananas, because I assume you went bananas, and therefore you learned the lesson.
Yeah, exactly. But this was the mistake that I think is acceptable, because it's a unique situation or new situation that I don't really know. I haven't really studied. So I'm okay making these mistakes, and I'm just going to study the spot and get better. It's not in the unacceptable, you should be better than that category.
Next to identifying mistakes in game, do you have any like off-game processes of analyzing your stats on a regular basis to see if you're doing something too frequently or not frequent enough?
In terms of stats and database stuff like that, I do it, but it is a bit more complicated nowadays, because you have all the PKOs and mystery bounties, which will affect your stats. Like, you're going to have to limp more, or you're going to have to play tighter, play wider, whatever it is. And then you also have like GG, where you have to convert the hand histories, and some hands get lost. It's not very clear exactly what's going on with stats. What I do instead is I record pretty much every session I played for the past year or so, and then I go over the recording. So that way I can pick up on, I guess, subconscious mistakes I'm making. Like if maybe I'm overfolding the big blind, or I'm not opening some bottom hand on the button, or whatever it may be, or I'm not randomizing a 3-bet spot, whatever it is, I can look at that through the recording. And this has been very beneficial for me. I have maybe hundreds of sessions recorded by now.
Yeah, like it's definitely different in cash games where the game is way more static. So analyzing databases and looking at frequencies is going to be way more handy. Where like a frequency is going to change so much based on the stack size, your stack size at the table, ICM, etc. That it's must be a very difficult way to analyze. You mentioned PKOs. I mean, you have to help me out here. You have PKOs, PSKOs. What I feel like you specialized a bit more in this area. What are like some common mistakes you see, or maybe we should start at what were like some mistakes that you in the beginning made when these type of tournaments got introduced, and what are like common mistakes you see players make when joining like the knockout tournaments? What's kind of the main strategical adjustments that people should take in consideration?
Right. So PKOs, or progressive knockout tournaments, is the format where you start with a bounty on your head, and then every time you knock someone out, you pocket half his bounty, but the other half goes on your head. So the person that's going to bust you next is going to take more money than you took from the person you passed before. And indeed, this is a bit of a specialty of mine. I even have a course out on that. And I always was attracted to PKOs from the first moment they came out, because I thought it was a new poker format that not a lot of people knew about. Whereas in the traditional tournaments, when I started moving up, people were already where I was before. Whereas PKOs was like evening the play field, right? Because it's a new format, no one knows about it. So now I can be the best or among the best without needing prior experience or having to build up to it. The most common mistakes, they are quite a few. So I would say most of them derive from people not accurately turning a bounty into big blinds and understanding its value. Once you understand how much a bounty is worth, in terms of big blinds, then you can adjust your strategy accordingly. Because if a bounty is worth, let's say, half a person stack, then that is extremely important. You really need to go after that. Whereas if a bounty is worth 10% of their stack, well, doesn't matter too much. And seeing or realizing how much it is worth in blinds instead of just monetary value is, I think, really, really important and can help solve a lot of mistakes.
So you have to make the conversion in your head. It sounds a bit like, for example, in cash games, in live cash games, but actually nowadays also online with some apps and stuff, you have stand-up game. I don't know if you ever heard about that, but basically everyone has to stand up, and when you win, you get to sit down, and the last person standing, he has to give everyone, I don't know, a couple big blinds, you know? That's kind of similar, like, especially when you're like 2 left or 3 left, it's like, well, for example, in Vegas a couple weeks ago, we were then playing 10, 20, 40, there's 100 bounty. So if there's only 2 left, basically, if I now get to sit down, I don't have to pay 800. So yes, there's 10, 20, 40, but not really 10, 20, 40, because there's sort of like an EV of extra 300 in the pot. That's kind of what I have to take in consideration.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, it's in somewhat similar to that for sure. Yeah.
But then in a knockout tournament, it's the same for everyone. Like, what makes it interesting in stand-up game, because if you're already seated down, the other guy's still standing up, you're playing with an unequal pot. So I'm playing for a way bigger pot than you're actually playing for, because you're already sitting down. So therefore, for example, I can bet 3x the pot. And for me, that's like equivalent to a pot bet. But for the person sitting down, it's like a 3x pot bet. So it creates a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but in a way, it is kind of similar in bounties as well, because of who covers whom. If I cover you and I can get your bounty when I bust you, then I can just bet more because I have the extra value of getting your bounty. Whereas if you cover me, then you don't gain anything extra from doubling up against me.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it creates a very interesting dynamic.
It does create this imbalance, exactly, where, like busting you is worth more to me than you doubling up for me.
Then what's the adjustment? I feel like they have knockout and they have progressive knockout, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, yeah. So knockouts is when the bounty is static all throughout the tournament. It starts at a specific value from the beginning, and it's the same value until the end. Whereas progressive, it's what I mentioned, where when you bust someone, you get half his bounty, and the other half goes on your head and increases your own bounty. So then by the time the tournament reaches the final table, bounties will be huge then, and multiple times the buy-in.
So I guess in a normal knockout,
basically.
I guess in a normal knockout in the beginning, bounties are more important than later, you know, compared to the payouts. It's not that important. With progressive, it's different. The other way around.
Exactly. In normal bounties, the bounties at the beginning are worth a lot, but then when you get to, let's say, the final table, the bounties are completely insignificant. They mean absolutely nothing. Whereas in progressive knockouts, the bounties at the beginning aren't worth as much, but then they keep on having a pretty high value all throughout the tournament because they become bigger and bigger.
I guess the designers of bounty tournaments realized that when they put the bounty, and they were like, "This is no fun at the end. Let's make the bounty progressive." And you were like, "Hey, nice, a new puzzle to solve, right?" Because it sounds like you enjoy the puzzle solving.
Exactly.
Where I guess it's an interesting mindset, because I can also understand that some people who were studying knockouts were like, "Oh, finally studied this shit, now I can play," and then they invent like a new format, progressive. They're like, "Shit, I finally got this game solved," and now they invented a new game. But you were like, nice, new edge.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much like that.
You talked a little. I heard you and Adam talk about bankroll management in terms of field size. I guess in my head it was always like more of like a return of investment, but I guess field size in terms of variance is more important. What is some things to take in consideration when building like your tournament schedule?
So in terms of selecting which tournaments you will play, of course, you have to go by the bankroll formula based on your capital and the buy-ins and the ROI, as you said, but then also the field size. So this will definitely help you choose which tournaments are right for you. But then also you have to keep into consideration, I guess, whether you will be burnt out by that point or how many days you want to play. And this goes more about creating live tournament schedules, I feel like. Because a lot of people go to Vegas and they have this schedule of playing every day. And then after playing like for 2 weeks, they just feel so exhausted, but they end up having to skip some major tournaments. So it's important to try and figure out what your state of mind will be at that point. so that, okay, maybe you can skip a cheaper tournament earlier on to have enough energy to play the better, more expensive tournament towards the end of the schedule, for example.
So you can create like some must plays and some possible plays depending on how I feel or something.
Exactly. This is exactly how I approach it. I have the mandatory playing days, and then I try to create some space around them. Like maybe take a day off, 2 days ago, or figure out when I'm gonna go out, what I'm gonna do around the must play days. Yeah.
When in like your tournament schedule, you mentioned field size. It's hard to win a tournament with like 3,000 runners. Would you deliberately add like some smaller field tournaments to, get some more chances of actually booking a win?
Online, you don't really have to do that because you can play enough tournaments. Like you can fill out your screen with different type of tournaments, so you don't have to choose one over the other. I guess this goes more towards live poker and choosing smaller fields in live where you have to be more selective. Again, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would just go for the one that is going to be the highest EV for me based on how much time I spend playing it. But I can see it being consideration for maybe someone who is struggling a bit more with bankroll. Just do, or even like emotionally, booking a win is definitely going to help boost your morale.
Yeah, so I looked at it more from that perspective. Let's say, for example, you grind a lower buy-in range and all the tournaments are huge. I could see, like from my perspective, that I would want to register some tournaments that I actually have a bigger chance of reaching a final table, feel good about myself and actually booking a win. So that next time I'm like, wow, at least I have a win under my belt, even though it was like a 100-man tournament or something.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It just goes back to what I said about me not having this emotional attachment or not really caring. So I wouldn't have this for myself, but I can see how it might be beneficial for some other people for sure. I can see the logic behind it. It just doesn't apply to me, I guess.
You mentioned that you started basically at some of the lower buy-ins. You then went to the BitB. You're playing, I think, 100 average buy-in. Had to move down a little bit, and after that started to move up again. When working your way through the ranks, which jump in stakes did you find the hardest?
Interesting. I would say going from like average buying 200 to 500, I would say that was the bigger jump, because you go from having a lot of recreationals, a lot of low-level regs in these $100 to $200 buys, to playing mostly with good regs at 500 and 1Ks. I think the jump from, let's say, average buying 500 to average buying 2K isn't that big because most of the regs are the same. We just have different type of recreationals, I guess. You still get to play with the top regs even in the 500s. So yeah, for me, I think that is the biggest jump, like between 200 and 500.
So basically, the jump is the highest, where the elite, like basically the bottom buy-in range of elite recs, that's where the jump is highest. I feel like it's a bit similar in cash, where you have like sort of a low end, whereas like the elite would never go lower. For example, you would almost never see like the elite players play 500 NL, but they could play 2K NL, for example. So 2K NL plus, like 1020 plus, I would say is a big jump compared to like 500 NL or 1K NL. So that seems a bit similar. What were like some leaks in your games or ways or flaws in how you approach the game that got exposed when you were jumping up to this 500 ABI, and how did you go about fixing them?
Good question. Let me try to remember, because it's been some time. It's been some years. I would say the number one thing that maybe I struggle a bit more to this day is sticking a bit too much to theory and not deviating enough against the different opponent types. Maybe it's because I give a bit too much credit to some of my opponents where I shouldn't. I would say this has been the biggest leak that I've struggled to feel for quite some time now. Just not deviating enough from theory. And obviously, I don't think there's any argument that the correct play, like the maximum EV play, will not be GTO in almost any case. You will need to adjust your opponent's tendencies, and that's going to be the best play. But when you are not exactly certain of your opponent's mistakes, and then also when you don't have much confidence that you're doing that well in the higher binds, it's very easy to just try and stick to GTO and not make adjustments you feel might be better.
Yeah,
I would say that is the one I remember the most.
a common trend, like in the podcast, especially when people moved up, it's often that you put your opponents on a pedestal, right? You're now playing against these guys, you know, they almost feel like super gods. So you're not gonna go out there and say, oh, these guys must all be terrible. Let's try out all my exploitative tricks. It's easy to tell to yourself like, oh, this probably doesn't work, you know, because this is, you know, this is this guy and he's so elite. What do you think it was about your opponent's play? Like what makes some, what's the difference between guys, the elite guys that play 500 and higher compared to like the mid-stakes guys? What makes them so much tougher to play against on average?
Yeah, it's hard to put them all in one group. It's that pretty much all of them do one thing really good, whatever that thing may be. You have the guys that are GTO beasts that know every spot really, really well. Then you have the guys who have just really good intuition. Like they're gonna know when a spot is extremely underbluffed or when a spot is overbluffed, or oh, this guy took 20 seconds to bet, that means he's weak or strong or whatever it may be. Then you have the guys who are like relentlessly aggressive, who are gonna 3-bet too much and they're gonna barrel a lot, and this makes them really hard to play against. Yes, they will end up punting sometimes, but still they're tough opponents to have against you. And there are a few more categories, but basically it's that all these successful players, they do something very well. It's different among them. It's not, there's not one player who is perfect in every area, besides Adrian Mateos, as everyone knows. But no, everyone does one thing really well, and I think this is what stands out.
You mentioned that you got coached the first time, I think, was by Grafdekel, and later that you also joined BitB. What has been the biggest strategical breakthrough in your career that you recalled?
I actually think it was with Grafdekel during our first coaching when he did a database analysis of mine and just went through my stats. Because in those 90 minutes, we went over like 20 things I was doing wrong habitually while playing. Whether it was not raising enough from the button or over folding the big blind or like not c-betting enough, whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what was 10 years ago or whatever. But that was definitely the biggest breakthrough for me, because just in 90 minutes, I saw 20 things I can work on and I can improve on. And also it just made me understand how much more work I need in the game that I thought I was doing good in.
Yeah, sometimes like there's almost no value to be put at a different perspective, right? You could look at your own game and be like, yeah, I cannot see what I'm doing wrong anymore. But then someone else can take a look and be like, well, I can see what you're doing wrong. And it's like, exactly. Oh, wow, tell me, please. So that's like an outside eye on your game, I think is insanely valuable. You mentioned already that you put in a lot of hours in studying, and you go in with a specific goal, right? You wanted to get an answer, and it didn't really matter if it takes 2 hours or 10 hours. A lot of our audience listening, you know, they're very motivated. They often put in a lot of hours in trying to improve, but they don't really know how to improve or specifically what to study, what kind of has highest EV to study. So maybe could you give some guidelines in terms of which spots you would recommend studying? So which spots are like very high EV, and which spots they should probably steer away from, and maybe some guidelines in like the study processes that you follow? For
sure, yeah. So the way I've approached things is to make a priority list of the things that I need to study based on how often I encounter them in game. This would be the first, I guess, factor. So let's say defending the big blind, it happens 1,000 times every session. So that's something you need to get really good at. But then let's say c-betting in 4-bet pots. That doesn't come up very often. Like usually when the 4-bet is going to be an all-in or the other guy is going to fold. So this is something that is going to be way lower on the priority list because it just doesn't matter that much. It happens very rarely. And it's also not that hard, not that easy to make mistakes when you have a super strong 4-betting range. So number one thing, yeah, would be how often does this issue come up while playing? And then second would be how expensive is it? So for example, ICM on final tables. Sure, you don't make a final table every day, but when you do, that's when all the money comes in play. So a mistake on a final table can be way, way more costly than a mistake at the beginning of the tournament, whatever mistake that is. So yeah, you have to consider these two factors, how often and how expensive, and then make a priority list based on that. And also the way I approach things is go at one topic at a time. I know for others, it has been working to just do a little bit of everything. Like, oh, I'm going to study 1 hour ICM, then 1 hour of PKOs, then 1 hour of this. I get that. It just didn't work for me. I just want to focus on one topic at a time. And when that topic is done, we can move on to the next one. And then one more thing that I want to say, and I'm not saying it because I'm coaching people, but there is no shame in getting coaching from someone who is doing better than you at your stakes. And very often you will get feedback that you're not expecting to get. It's easy to think you know everything that you're doing wrong, but yeah, you will often not. And I know that from personal experience.
What if you said there's no shame? You think that's kind of what people holds, what kind of holds people back in taking coaching?
Not only that, but I do think I have spoken to some people, so I know, not just think, that they feel bad about getting coaching from someone because they are in a way admitting they are of inferior knowledge to that person, and they have their ego get in the way of that.
Yeah,
I don't know how often it happens, but I know it does for sure.
I definitely can see that happening. I was wondering, like, if you've identified the leak and you're trying to fix it, how do you measure progress for yourself?
Mm-hmm. So it would be through just looking at this stat again a few months afterwards and seeing whether it has improved or not. And if it's not something that can be tracked in stats, then maybe through a recording or live stream, whatever form of poker you're playing, just going back and checking that you have indeed fixed the leak after a few months.
I know, like most top players, you nowadays use a lot of solvers, but you've been in poker for a very long time. Do you recall the time when solvers came out and like some of the big aha moments you got from it?
Yeah, I think solvers came out just as I was starting to become a professional in poker. I think it was around the same time. As for the biggest aha moments, interesting. I don't think it was so much with Solver. I think it was more when HRC, which is kind of recent, when Hold'em Resources added the post-flop solver, so then you could get the correct pre-flop strategy for every spot. So for example, you would know what to flat and what to 3-bet with ICM or in bounty tournaments. And I think this was the biggest aha moment because you could clearly see things that you were thinking about now approved by the solver.
Does that give you like a certain amount of confidence? Like I assume certain things you were right at and certain things you were wrong at.
No, for sure it does. Knowing that the adjustment you were making based on your assumptions is actually the correct adjustment to make is definitely a very big confidence boost. Same goes for when you node lock a sync, for example. Like you're thinking this spot, oh, my opponent is gonna bet less with this hand, so then I'm gonna adjust by doing this. And then when you node lock on the solver and you see that, yeah, the solver agrees with your adjustment, that's definitely a very big confidence boost, yeah.
I was wondering, like, at the tables when you're playing, when making decisions, what for you are the most important things you take in consideration? And what do you think is something that players way too much importance at when making a decision at the table?
Yeah, so of course, number one thing that like my thought process is, okay, what is the GTO approach here? What should be the correct move that the solver would do against the solver? And then after arriving to that conclusion, I then start to think, how should I adjust from that based on what I think my opponent is doing? If I don't have a strong read, I'm just gonna go by GTO, and then based on how strong my read is, adjust accordingly. One thing that I see people give a lot of weight to is whether they think someone is over bluffing or under bluffing a spot. Just as an example. And the fact that someone has a tendency to over bluff doesn't mean that you get to call him down with any two cards. And the fact that someone under bluffs doesn't mean that you fold every single bluff catcher you have to him. Unless, of course, it's an extreme case, but I'm talking for like normal cases. And I think people take this way too far. Once they think someone is over bluffing, they're like, okay, that's it. We're never folding to this guy anymore. And the opposite. So I think it's always important to have, I guess, perspective of how big a deviation your opponent is doing and then deviate accordingly without going overboard.
I can see myself being guilty of that as well. I feel it's like more of like a hooking bias where like, oh, this guy's a nit. And then you kind of have that in your head. And then you're being put into a specific scenario. Whereas like the stamp of like, well, this guy's a nit, so I'm not going to call him down is so big that you're missing like, well, this specific texture, my specific hand, this specific bet size, all these new pieces of information. they don't go in because you've big stamp like Nit, I'm not gonna call him down. And same with like, oh, this guy's just fucking crazy, even though your intuition is scrolling like, well, maybe you should actually fold there. But like, yeah, but this guy is fucking crazy. But you know, there's a lot of other variables in play that he's probably not bluffing enough.
Yeah, exactly. Just not being absolute and taking everything in perspective.
You mentioned coaching. You do quite a lot of coaching yourself as well. In your experience, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. I thought that was the question. Go on, sorry.
No, yeah. I was gonna say, in your experience, like, what are the most common leaks you see the mid-stakes players make? Why do they fail to make that jump that you made to the 500 ABI and plus?
First of all, the reason that they don't make the jump, I don't think is necessarily limited to just their playing mistakes. It also has to do with not having, I guess, enough conviction into it, not spending enough time, not being devoted or disciplined enough. Not necessarily, oh, this guy doesn't open the button, that's why he doesn't play high stakes. It's not just that. It's a lot of things that you need to fulfill in order to move up and play the high stakes. In terms of, let's say, statistical leaks, I would say the one that I mentioned a few times already, that people tend to not raise enough from the button, and they tend to overfold their big blind, and they tend to play mystery bounties really badly.
Mystery bounty is very. Oh wait, so there was another form that we can.
Oh yeah, there's another one. There's the mystery bounty. Oh yeah.
But mystery bounty. So how does that? No wait. So the EV of a mystery bounty, I guess, in the beginning is the same, but once bounties go out, it starts to change.
So mystery bounties don't start at the beginning. They usually start when you reach the in the money stage of the tournament.
But then in the beginning, they're all the same, right? Because you don't know which ones are in, which ones are out.
You play normal poker until you reach the money, and then you get the bounties in play.
But then in the beginning, you have like, you can give an average EV to a bounty based on all the prizes that are still in. But if all the big ones are already out, the EV decreases.
Yeah, but again, this only happens after you go in the money. There's no bounty in play before the money, nothing.
So it becomes, so in the money, getting in the money becomes more valuable. So the ICM, the bubble ICM is bigger?
In a way, yes. And then the bounties are also huge, because when you get in the money, there's like, let's say 15% of the field remaining. So then a bounty ends up being worth like 3-4 starting stacks. So you get in the money, and then suddenly you have a bounty worth like 20 big blinds. And you have a bunch of 5 big blind stacks or 10 big blind stacks, with their bounty being worth 20 big blinds. So
wow, so normally after the bubble everyone busts, but here it's a little bloodbath. Everyone is just all in all the time.
Yeah, it's just bloodbath. It's literal bloodbath when
it's pretty fun. When going into the tournament, like straight away first hand, if let's say you just normally wreck straight away from the beginning, how big of an impact does it already have on your strategy? The fact that getting into the money is it zero still? Because I can imagine that getting into the money has more EV?
Well, sure, but when the tournament starts, the money is so far away that it doesn't really matter.
Okay. So it's more in the bubble that it becomes, the bubble pressure becomes higher than it normally is.
In a way, yes, but then you also have to think about it from the other side. Let's say you are a short stack on the bubble, near the bubble or before the bubble. Well, if you make the money, you're going to double up way easier, because you're going to get called by any 2 cards when you jam. So you're more likely to double up then. Like, you're going to have to get called by 7 deuce offsuit when you jam, because of how much your bounty is worth. So then you double up more often after the bubble. But yeah, it's a bit complicated, and solvers aren't 100% accurate on that. But yeah, it's a new format. I personally don't really like it, but it's popular.
So it's popular. You study it and you try and you try to become good at it.
Yeah.
Adam, you ever played a mystery bounty? I think this is definitely past your time. I've never played a bounty tournament in my life, actually.
No, I've not, but it sounds exciting. I like the mystery element of it, where there's something on the line, like you don't know, like this mystery, like the mystery bounty, but it's like creates this kind of novelty where I'm sure the fish absolutely love it, where you can win like big bounties, like not knowing. So yeah, I think that's a big draw. You mentioned that people misplay these bounties. So one of the things you said to Rene there, what are the big mistakes that people don't adjust to for mystery bounties?
There are many things in play here, and I don't want to get too deep into strategy, but basically you have to be with all the limping involved and how much you have to call against opens and against jumps. It's just a different kind of game that we're not really used to, because we're not used to having, let's say, 30 dead big blinds in the pot that you have to play for. So this just creates many different kind of play styles that people aren't familiar with.
It comes back to the
Yeah.
same principles that you mentioned in knockouts, right? You just have to be able to convert the bounty into added big blinds into the pot.
Yeah.
And it sounds like now there's even more big blinds into the pot. And at some point,
Yeah, exactly.
if there's fucking 50 big blinds in the pot, yeah, it's there's quite a lot of money to be won.
Yeah. One of the main reasons I don't like it is especially at higher stakes, because high stakes mystery bounties don't get that many runners. So then when bounties come in play, it's usually going to be around the final table. So let's say you make the final table of a 10K mystery bounty, right? You are in the money, you just make the final table. And there are going to be stacks around 20 big lines, and the bounty will be worth like 40 big lines. So then if you're on 10K final table, going all in with like Jack 3 off against King 7 off against pocket deuces, playing this like massive 3-figure or like 100K EV pots, not that's 6 figures, not 3, like 6-figure pots with completely random hands. It's just not very fun, I think.
Also, I guess for viewers to watch, it's also like, whoa, this, especially like the people that don't make the conversion in their head. They're like, what are these people doing? These are supposed to be the best. They're going on with Jack 3 offsuit, blah, blah, blah. Like I can see from a commercial perspective, it's amazing. You know, you see this guy drag a 1 million out of an envelope. It's great for TV. But I get what you mean. Like it has to be a big field with a lot of recreational players for it to be fun.
Exactly. For that, I can see it. I can see why it's fun, why it attracts recreational, sure. But then having like a 10K mystery bounty with, let's say, 30 people, I don't think that's very good.
All right, I want to dive into what allows you to be a good learner. So I think for you, you've mentioned you're a sponge. You've learned a lot from being around coaches and other people, and you did a great job with Rene explaining how to know what to learn. So if I think about being a good learner, it's first about knowing what to learn, but then it's knowing how to learn. So the how to learn and what you do specifically, I'm really curious about. How do you learn topics? Let's say you've identified your priority list, you know which is most costly, you found the one topic that you're going to go deep on, maybe you've got some feedback from a coach who's also highlight this area. How do you solve that problem? How do you spend your day on that, getting better at it?
Yeah, I think I touched on this a bit earlier. It's basically about figuring out the whole picture and not the exact specific spot. So again, like running scripts and checking out similar scenarios and trying to understand the underlying logic behind the strategy. This is what I focus on. So just making sure I truly understand the spot and not just look at the solution and be like, okay, that's what I should have done next. Just like truly understanding why it happens and how I can replicate it in the future.
When do you know that you've done enough? So for you, you're someone who can do a whole day on a topic. When do you know, all right, I've got the main concepts here, I understand how the spot works. How do you kind of stress test that to know that, okay, I can move on to another topic now?
Most topics you can practice a bit on a solver or a trainer. Like PioSolver has one built in, GTOWizard. There are many different trainers that you can practice on and see that you have indeed learned the spot. And then for more, I guess, abstract concepts, like some ICN concepts, there's no real way to know that you've done enough. It's just that when you face a similar spot, you either know what to do or you don't. If you don't, well, you haven't done enough.
Simple as that. There's a pass-fail scenario at some point where you either stand up and pass the test or you fail.
I've one question. How do you fight perfectionism in this area? Because like you can go into one spot, like let's say you can put 20 hours into some spot. The first hours are going to be super valuable because you learn a lot. But then at some point, you know, you get like to the law of diminishing returns where it's just perfectionism, very small details where a lot of the time could be higher if you put into a different spot. Where do you kind of say, okay, this is too perfectionistic? Because I notice a lot of players when they study, in my opinion, they go way too deep and they go in way too deep nuances where I'm like, listen, it would have been better. Maybe you just studied this spot for 3 hours, moved on to another spot, and then later come back and go deeper there. How do you fight the need for perfectionism in studying?
I don't think there's a clear sign of when to stop. I would say when you get to a high enough accuracy where, as you said, the remaining few percentages just don't really affect your review that much, it doesn't matter. But I will once again go back to how important it is to get the general picture. And that's gonna move you away from perfectionism or from being, I guess, going after the details too much, because they don't matter. It doesn't matter what you're gonna do on this very specific river, on this very specific run out. It's about, oh, what do I do when the river is like the fourth flush? And just studying this kind of idea and not the exact spot. And I think this answers your question about perfectionism quite a bit. Just get the general idea, not the exact spot.
So when you notice that you're going too much into details into specific spots and kind of lose the bigger picture, that's when you're like, okay, maybe I should move on to a next spot.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe there are some super weird exception spots where you look at it and you're like, oh, this doesn't happen anywhere else. Why does this happen here? Well, it's fine to not spend any time in that. If it doesn't come up, it just doesn't matter, basically.
Yeah, so you have to recognize this not as like but then you have to recognize this as not being a potential big aha moment, which you don't really know beforehand. I mean, I've went down to the rabbit hole sometimes, and sometimes it was a lot of hours waste of my time, but sometimes there was something in it, How do I then identify before I put all that hours in that this is going to be, a waste of time?
I think the best way for that is to run some scripts and then quickly see on a document whether what you noticed happens more or not. I have an example of this. Some time ago, I noticed that, let's say, under the gun versus big blind, under the gun c-bets, and then on a specific board, like ace 5-5 or something it was, the big blind would raise to like 10x the c-bet. And I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. Very interesting. Let's dive deeper into that. So then I ran a bunch of scripts for different positions, different boards, stacks, and so on, to see, is this actually a thing? And the answer was, no, it's not a thing. It never happens, only on this board with some very low frequency specific hands. So then that's not something I need to spend time or care about, because it's so small, so insignificant, but yeah, it's not worth the time.
Yeah, and that one time a year that actually ace 5-5 comes, you're like, 10x, let's go.
Sure, but it's not worth the time.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, because I think it was a little bit of a unanswered question in my head. It's especially what Rene said as well, like, because a lot of players do get lost in going too deep. And I think for you, the kind of key lesson there is always remember the big picture, like being able to zoom out and kind of knowing the difference between the forest and the weeds, like the big picture of what you're trying to see, and then knowing you're digging down into the weeds, that like, okay, I could find some treasure here, but generally this is low value. I've got the big picture stuff. I think for you, obviously, you've perfected that skill to know what the big picture is and what you're trying to find. I think a lot of players just go on this diamond hunt, trying to find that like needle in the haystack, and they spend 6 hours and they're like, oh, found something, and then they look back and go, oh yeah, that spot never happens ever. Okay, cool, but I learned some stuff. And I think it's I learned some stuff, but I learned some valuable stuff. And I think for you, because you've got that zoomed out lens and you look for the big picture, you're able to do that very well. So I'm glad we clarified that. All right, I want to do some reflecting on your poker career, looking back and seeing some lessons you've learned. So first question is, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned for your poker career?
Definitely has to do with variance and how you cannot control whether you win or lose. You can only control how you play, and the rest will come. By far, number one, I think.
Yeah, that's the one where you've got to kind of learn the hard way sometimes. I think variance, we can look at variance calculators all day. We can logically go, oh, this can happen X amount of time. But until you've experienced variance emotionally with a lot of money on the line during tough times and had to sit through the variance and push through it, it takes a long time to experience it and learn the lesson at a high level.
And it's just so different from other areas of life as well, because in pretty much every other aspect of life, when you do good, you get rewarded. That's it. That's how life works. Well, not necessarily in tournament poker.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think for tournament poker as well, like it's so many unknowns. I think other formats have more like the EV that you can look at, whereas MTTs, it's very hard to know, like, do I just suck? Like, am I running bad? Is this variance? When's it going to end? So I think as you mentioned, your way of knowing, getting coaches to look at your game, reviewing your game, recording your sessions, looking back, all these things allow you to build more confidence. So during these bad patches of variance, you can like know that you're playing well, or at least have some more confidence that you're not deluding yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I want to know about your definition of success and how that's changed over the year. So your definition of success right now.
Right now, okay. So right now, being able to do, you mean for me, right? The success for me, or in general?
For you.
For me, yeah. So being able to do what I like and making a great living out of it, while also getting to travel the world, meet new people, it's just, I don't want anything else. I'm very satisfied with all that.
How has that changed compared to Alex 10 years ago, getting into poker after his gaming background?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I think it was much more about, oh, I have to make some money, I have to win some more money. And of course, this is still very, very important, and the reason why I play the game. But it's definitely not like the number one thing or the only thing.
Did that change for you? Was there a kind of landmark financial goal you hit, or a progression that you had where you're like, I'm caring about the money a bit less right now, and I'm starting to just enjoy the lifestyle and the process of playing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as you said, it came when I started being more financially free. And I was at the point, and I'm at a point where I can comfortably do things that I want in life. And then getting more money doesn't necessarily change that. I think there's, in terms of finances, there's a point where you are comfortable and you can do the things you want. And then making more than that is just extra. It doesn't really change your way of life much at all. So I think this was the point after which I started caring more about the other things.
Yeah, I think that's a big point, that big transition moment where often in the early days, like the money you make can change your lifestyle, or at least perceived lifestyle, the life you live day to day. Then you get to a point where you're like, okay, more money would be good, but my day to day will look the same. Like I'm still going to wake up at the same time, live the same way, live in the same house, spend the same money. Ah, cool. So I can increase my bankroll, but now it's just a different relationship to that. And I think once you get to that point for you, some people just keep improving their spends, like they keep spending more and more, bigger house, bigger car, more expense. So those guys have a harder job getting to that kind of settle point. But I think it's a good point to observe, because then you can go, right, cool, I did this for the money and I got to this point. Now what do I really care about? And as you mentioned, that kind of freedom, being able to travel, be able to just play this game that you enjoy for a living, that becomes like a stronger motive and a more long-lasting one.
And also the competition, like competing at the highest level against the smartest people in poker, is also something I really enjoy.
So this next question might link to that, but I'm curious to know, at what moments in your poker career have been the most enjoyable, and what do you do now to keep poker enjoyable?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the whole like poker experience, I think just studying I enjoy a bit more than playing, even because I just care about the strategy. And by studying, you get to dive into the strategy without having any variance involved in that. Whereas when you play, yes, you get to execute the strategy, but then the result doesn't necessarily prove that what you did is correct. So I would say I actually enjoy studying a bit more than playing. But in terms of a more like practical down-to-earth experience, I would say that this year has been one of the best of my life, both in terms of results and the places I've been to and just everything. So yeah, it's still a very enjoyable experience to me.
What made this year so special?
Running good, but then also the live stops that I went to Korea for Triton, which is a very unique place and not a place I expected to visit. Then also some places in Europe. I went like to Oslo and Luxembourg, and some, again, places you don't really expect to visit. So I definitely enjoyed those. So all that combined with, again, running good, which it's an important thing of how your year goes, I guess. Even though, yes, results don't really affect you, you're still going to be happy if you win $1 million, and you're still going to be a bit less happy if you lose $1 million, right? It's very human, I think. And just, yeah, overall didn't have any misfortunes, I guess, this year either.
Did this year motivate you to do more traveling, play more live stops from your experiences this year?
Truth is not really, because I don't enjoy live poker as much as I do online. I find online poker just more entertaining because I don't appreciate the extra skill set of live poker so much.
I'm guessing it's quite boring for you as well, right? The speed of play, being a gamer.
Yeah, exactly. So online, the extra skill set compared to live, you need to be able to multitask and play many tables and like think very quickly. Whereas in live, things are much slower, as you said, and the extra skill set is, oh, I need to take 15 seconds to act every time, or oh, I need to count the time between my breaths, or oh, I need to not blink quickly. Just like things that I understand are part of the skill set and they're hard to do, but I don't enjoy them.
Yeah, that's a big thing to know, like what you enjoy and what's your kind of skill set. It's not a natural strength. Yes, you could get good at it, but it's not something you naturally gravitate to the same way you do multi-table online. So you mentioned that you believe that anyone can achieve success if they commit themselves to it. So do you believe anyone could follow your path and make it as a high-stakes MTT player?
The answer is yes. So I think there are basically two paths towards becoming a very successful tournament player. One is that you have some sort of natural gift, whether it is picking up patterns really quickly, or like timing tells, or just getting into the other person's mind. There are a lot of examples of players like that who don't necessarily study too much, but have this special gift, I guess, in a way that allows them to be very, very successful. Now, that's not something you can replicate. That's not something you can teach. That's, yeah, you either have it or you don't. But then there's the other type of player, which I think I fall into, which is the player that just works hard and studies and spends time into it and just sees it as the job where you have to click a button. And I think everyone can do that as long as they have this like inner dialogue and they realize what they have to do to get there. I don't think I have any unique special skill set or any attribute that allows me to do what I do. I think it's just all grown on me.
Yeah, that's good. So for you, you feel like all the skills you have been developed either through maybe some of your gaming background for the multi-tabling, but a lot of them in the battlefield of poker. I think often it's like from the outside looking in, it's really hard to distinguish between what are kind of natural talents that someone's just very good at so they have success, and which of them do they not really have growing up or in their early experiences and they had to build during poker. I think poker is one of those ones where more skills that players have at the top, they've had to develop through the journey. Obviously IQ, speed of thinking, some of those things are quite dependent on your genetics, but a lot of things you develop through playing, through learning, through repetition. So what would you say is the most important trait or skill that a aspiring poker player, maybe who's stuck at the lower to mid stakes, would have to develop in order to bridge that gap and start reaching towards high stakes?
Yeah, I would say just understanding that poker is basically statistics and you just have to follow the maths and play your strategy and click your buttons and then things will come. Just not have an emotional attachment. Again, I understand some people enjoy that, but for me, this was like a key moment where I just stopped caring about, oh, do I win, do I lose, did this guy bluff me? None of this matters. It's just statistics. You click a button and that button makes you money. And that's what you have to do. That's your job. So I think just getting this like distance from all the ego, all the feelings, or everything else involved with poker, I think once that is done, then there's nothing stopping you.
What would you say to that player who's like, that sounds amazing, I would love that, please sign me up, but when I play, I experience so many emotions. I feel the frustration. It hurts so much when I lose. My ego's on the line. I feel like I lose at times. I feel all these mixed bag of emotions when I'm playing, and I can't separate what I know in my logical mind, the statistical nature of the game, from what I'm experiencing. Any words for that person who's watching right now or listening, who's struggling there?
I would introduce them to you. So this is a bit tough because I don't feel like I'm equipped to answer that, because it's just something that has worked for me and it's something that grew on me gradually. I don't really have any advice. Just it has to do about convincing yourself that this is the case. You just have to like talk with yourself and figure it out. That's what worked for me anyway. I'm afraid I don't have any words of wisdom on that. So
well, your story, even though you might not be able to like piece together like exactly what happened because it's been a long poker journey, like you've shown that you can develop these traits. It wasn't like you were naturally gifted at it. And I think sometimes
no, for sure not.
Knowing you can get better at something. I think a lot of people, they limit themselves with beliefs because they go, oh, this is how I am. Oh, it's okay for Alex because he didn't experience emotions, but me, I'm not like that. But in reality, like, no, Alex also wasn't like that, and he worked on that, and he got better at it through repetition, through exposure, and now he's great because he doesn't think about winning and losing. But that wasn't him 5 years ago when he was stuck at whatever stakes. So I think it's good to relay that.
Quick funny story. When I first started playing, again, it was like first, second year of uni or something. I got a boxing, how do you call it? The thing hanging from the ceiling for boxing to have next to my office, so that every time I would, I don't know, get bad beat or lose a flip or something, I would just get up and punch that to get the like anger out. So yeah, I definitely was in that place once upon a time.
Yeah, speedball, one of those ones you do that with.
Yeah.
I had a punch bag in my garage
Punch
when
bag,
I was in
that's what it's
for a
called,
little bit. Yeah, I think it's one of those, understanding that poker does bring a lot of emotions to the surface, especially early on. And as you mentioned, when your identity is involved in it, financial pressures in the short term, you're going to experience that as emotions and frustrations. And just knowing that this will pass at some point, you can get better at dealing with them. It's not always going to be as intense as it is now. And yeah, almost everyone's had to do the work, get the repetition in to kind of get past that. Even the guys they look up to who maybe like yourself who don't have that issue now, you still have to do the work over time to get to that situation. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to remind people who are struggling to instill that logical framework when emotions are coming up. All right, I've got a question to ask. This might make my own curiosity. I'm sure there's other people who are curious as well. I'm curious to know, how do you think about who are the best players at MTTs? So like at cash games, there's a clear hierarchy,
Yes.
right? So like the
Yes.
best players battle each other, in the best regs kind of respect each other, go, right, these guys are the top 5 or 10 players. I'm sure most of the top cash game players will agree who's the kind of the top players. In MTTs, is there a clear hierarchy? Let's talk about online MTTs of who the best players are in terms of theoretically the best, the toughest to play against. And if there is, who are some of the players that most of you top regs start to think these guys are in the pool of the best MTT players online?
Mm-hmm. I definitely don't think there is a very clear ranking, because there are also so many things to consider when making that list. How are you going to rank who's the best? Is it going to be for who has won the most money? Well, then it's going to be like some WSOP main event winner. It's going to be for who has the biggest GTO, like theoretical knowledge. Well, yeah, but this guy might not be playing the highest EV moves because it all has to do about exploiting. Then you have the exploit guys. Yeah, but how do you know if their exploits are actually good? You can't base it on results. So it's very tough to come up with a list of who is the best. You can add people to a group, like these guys are really good because this guy does this well, this guy does that well, but it's hard to rank them, at least for me. It's hard to say, oh, this guy is the best, and then the second is this, and then the third is this. And
Yeah,
I think a lot of people disagree about a ranking as well. Like, I don't think you can find enough people who will agree on a ranking of tournament players.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine it's like pretty much impossible to get like a clear-cut 1, 2 to 10. I was just thinking maybe there's some players who, in all ranking variables, kind of rise to the top because, like, all right, we factor in a lot of stuff. All of us clever regs, we all know who's kind of good at certain things. And between like a big pool of you guys underground, you're like, all right, he's definitely one of the top 5 to 10 guys. He's definitely one of the top 5 to 10 guys. But yeah, it might be so hard to even get that close to a list.
Yeah, again, it's tough to say, especially because as like competitors, my job is to spot their mistakes and take advantage of them, right? So I'm focusing a lot more on people's mistakes than on what they do well. So then also my image of how they play is going to be skewed more towards their mistakes. It's going to be easier for me to say, oh, this guy does this and that wrong, and this guy does that and that and that wrong. So it's easier for me to have a more negative picture of how people play than, I guess, someone observing from the outside, because it's what I'm focused on for my game. But in terms of players, for me, I've always looked up to a lot of players, Graphical being, I guess, the most prominent one. That's why I chose him as a coach as well so many years ago. And I still think he's by far one of the best out there, at least in terms of theory. And hey, he won best up-and-coming player of the year or something last year, which is pretty funny.
Up and coming.
Yeah, up and coming. He's been playing for like 15 years or something.
That's it, right? I think like the longevity, if you look at, okay, who are the guys that have been, for example, take Lena, for example, now also with his recent WSOP score, but guys that have just been grinding these MTTs for tens of years, always at the highest stakes. I guess in MTTs is more the longevity that really kind of filters out who are the best.
For sure, yeah, for sure. Because in the short term, anyone can win tournaments. So exactly, if they keep on winning for many, many years, then they're probably doing a lot of things right.
You mentioned when you play against players, you're thinking from their weaknesses. What can I exploit? What can I get advantage of this player? I'm curious to know for you, let's say you're playing a final table and it's quite a tough lineup. And I think a lot of players would maybe start to get self-conscious that these guys could be really good. Maybe there's some players who you've built a bit of fear against because of their reputation or something like that. How do you, in the moment of battle, in a tough final table lineup or against in a 10K tournament or something, how does your mind sort of process like what you're trying to gain from that experience? In terms of, I'm playing some good players, I'm trying to learn from them and absorb knowledge, or I'm playing some guys who I can exploit. How does your mind kind of navigate the different player profiles when you're on like a tough lineup?
Yeah, again, I will just do my best to try and figure out how I can make money out of them. So I'm going to go through looking at specific reads I have for these players, looking at previous footage of tournaments they've played, and try to find out what do they do wrong and how can I capitalize on that. Because even the best players, everyone makes mistakes, right? So then trying to figure out what their mistakes are is still where my focus is going to be like. I will focus more, of course, on trying to exploit the weaker recreational player than the top high-stakes pro. But yeah, I will still focus more on trying to figure out their mistakes.
You mentioned you record a lot of your sessions and you watch them back. What are some of the insights you gained from that process of rewatching them? Because I'm thinking this is something that most players won't be doing. And I'm wondering what are kind of some of the insights you gain when you kind of rewatch a full session back?
So I would say that the number one thing that I noticed is that I tend to sometimes click fold on a mediocre hand when I have a decision elsewhere. So let's say I have a big decision on one table, and then I want to spend all my focus there. So then I'm going to quickly try to make decisions on the other tables so that I don't have to spend time on them. And when I'm in that stage, I'm very often just going to click auto fold on, let's say, King 7 offsuit on the bottom, which is supposed to be one of the bottom opens. So this is one of the things that I've noticed for sure, where when I have my attention focused on a big decision, I will make some marginal folds on some other tables, which is something really hard to pick up if you're not recording.
Yeah, I can imagine that as well. Like just looking at the hand replay is going to be very hard to spot a lot of these little tendencies that crop up. Do you also, when you look back at the session, do you look at other players, or are you mainly looking at how you've played?
I'm mostly looking at myself because you get so limited showdowns from the other players that it's gonna be pretty tough to pick substantial information up. For observing other players playing, it's more about the cards up replays that they have on PokerStars and GG.
Yeah, I can imagine you won't get enough of a sample size of cards to see to watch back. Yeah. Rene, for you, do you do any recording of your sessions? Have you found it's interesting to watch yourself back or learn anything from a recording? I remember one of my housemates who was playing a long heads-up battle, and he got crushed off this other player, and he couldn't figure it out why he lost to him. And then it turned out the other guy was recording their sessions playing and watching it back against the playing, and he picked up lots of timing tells on him. And he basically, theoretically, was like not as good, but he just like crushed him on small timing tells. And that kind of highlighted to me, it's like, oh, wait a second, there's something in watching these sessions back. And I started doing it myself in ranked battles in particular. I'd record the sessions, watch them back, and yeah, lots of insights that you can't gain by being in it. So yeah, I'm curious to know for you, Rene, if you ever recorded sessions and watched them back.
Yeah, I was going to say timing tells is definitely the first thing that comes to my mind, that you can spot more when you watch a session back than if you're actively thinking and, you're doing a lot of things. When you're just observing, like, oh, that was pretty quick, or that took long, and then you can kind of start to, because your mind is a bit more clear, right? You don't have to think about actually making the decision. You're just observing, and therefore, like, specifically timing tells, they stand out to me. But yeah, I've recorded a lot of sessions and watched back sessions, also then watch back with other players to kind of see, like, because I feel like if you do, for example, just a hand history review session with some other players, you're already kind of selecting hands. Whereas if you just review a live play, sometimes, there's just nothing and it's not that interesting. But sometimes, I don't know, you just do something, or there's a specific spot that someone says, oh, I would definitely not do this. And when it would not have been a hand that I would have selected to review. So basically, you also get to see hands that you thought maybe were standard, or situations that you just thought were standard that actually other people don't think are as standard. So I think that's very helpful. Alex, kind of wrapping this up, what would you describe as kind of the high point in your career, the thing that you're most proud of?
The high point of my career that I'm most proud of. Interesting. There are a lot of moments that come to mind, I guess, like winning a bracelet or stuff like that. Online bracelet, sadly, but bracelet nonetheless. But I would say it doesn't necessarily have to do with a win. It's more so just the moment I realized that, okay, I succeeded in the job that I chose, and I am financially free to do what I want, and I can stay in the house that I like and do the things I like. And outside of finances too, I just have freedom in my life. I don't have a boss. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I did that on my own. So I would say just like this realization would be the high point.
Yeah, I think definitely something to be proud of for sure. How do you see the future of poker, and how do you see yourself in it?
Yeah, online poker looks a bit grim, I'm not gonna lie. There are so many tools and new tools introduced every day to help you solve hands really quickly, and they can be used real time. Just a few days ago, we had the release of GTOWizard AI ICM solver. So you can solve ICM hands in a few seconds. So this is so easy to use for anyone on a final table, and it's gonna provide so much EV gain that it's really worrisome. And yes, they have their fair play check in order, but you can just do it from another computer or have someone do it for you. I'm not very optimistic about the future of online poker unless all these tools decide to provide some sort of delay or just some preventative measure from people using it in real time while playing. And there is also a bit of a conflict of interest because GTOWizard wants their software to be as usable as possible. By the way, I'm bringing GTOWizard because it's the most commonly used one. It's not just them. But yeah, on one hand, they want their software to be as quick and as easy as possible so that they make the most money. But then on the other hand, this causes it to be very dangerous for the integrity of the game. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a conflict there that it's not easy to resolve. So yeah, I'm not too optimistic about online poker. That having been said, I don't think it's as bad as some people paint it out to be on Twitter and whatnot. I don't think cheating is that rampant, and you can see it from the number of mistakes that you see people make on big final tables every day. So right now, I think it's okay, but I'm not very optimistic about the future. Live poker, on the other hand, I think has a very bright future ahead. It's booming because cheating is way tougher there. So I definitely think live will continue to grow, and then online, unless there's a drastic change, I'm not very optimistic.
But in terms of your own future plans in poker, so you already mentioned that the live extra skill set is not something that you specifically enjoy, but you do see a bright future. I mean, live events, they keep on growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually not very sure about that. As I said, I don't really like scheduling my days and my life so much. So I'm not sure for how much more I'm going to be playing poker for. I don't have any plans to quit currently, but if, let's say, online starts going really downhill and then live is my only option, I can see myself starting to move away from poker.
Any other interests that you might pursue or not currently on your mind?
Not much on my mind right now because poker is such a full-time job with like the playing, the studying, the traveling, the coaching, everything that, yeah, I just don't really have time to do many other things outside poker.
No more headspace to think about other things. I can see that.
Yeah, yeah.
What would you like the main takeaway for our audience to be of the conversation we had today?
I think I want to move back to how I really think anyone can succeed in playing poker, and just as long as you put in the work and you mentally prepare yourself for what is to come, it's achievable for everyone. I think maybe that should be the closing point and that should be the takeaway.
All right. Adam, any final questions?
No, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate you spending the last few hours with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a blast. I had a great time.
All right. Great conversation with Alex. Adam, what are your main takeaways of our conversation today?
I liked the start of the conversation when he said that he likes to always expect the worst. This is a very counterintuitive mindset, especially for MTT players who normally get very excited for deep runs, final tables, where often, like, let's say it's a big tournament and you're just thinking about your strategy. Then you get to the final table and there's 100K up top. A lot of players will be like, wow, this could be it. This could be the big moment. Whereas for him, he does the opposite. He's like, all right, I could finish 9th here, and that's okay. I think this allows him to really lower expectations in a way that allows him to focus on the strategy of the game and just playing poker. I think anything that can take you away from thinking of the external outcomes and gets you back in touch with playing your strategy works. It's really good. So he said for him it works well. He's mentioned some of the players and it doesn't work as well. So this is one, if you are an MTT player, you maybe try for yourself, see if you can lower expectations. Maybe you don't need to go as extreme as worst case scenario, but maybe lower expectations to not get too attached to those big external outcomes could be good. He mentioned how he learns from mistakes. I thought it was very good. He's very hard on himself in those moments, and he allows that to fuel him to not make that mistake again in future. So he mentioned, is it a mistake that I should know? I should know better. By that, he means he should know the strategy away from the tables. If so, he's very harsh on himself to fix that mistake immediately, and has very high standards with that. For him, that creates enough tension to want to solve the problem, but not enough performance anxiety or kind of frustration in the moment to impact performance in a bad way. And then he mentions if it's a mistake that he doesn't know the strategy, he's very quick to study that spot and want to learn and get better. So yeah, I think I like that. I know for you, Rene, you mentioned it was the opposite for you, more compassion. I remember European, he was saying the same for him. So yeah, you've got to find that style for yourself. But the main thing is, how can you learn from mistakes in the moment and also process mistakes, allow yourself to move past them as they're happening. He also mentioned how hard he works, how disciplined he's been. And yeah, I think he's a very good example of where you can get to in poker with the right work ethic and approach. So right now, he talked about having no ego, no feelings, no gambling tendencies. And it's very easy to go, all right, well, cool, he's a bit of a freak of nature. I can never do that. But at the same time, 10 years ago, that wasn't the version of Alex that he was, and he's built these kind of traits through a lot of hard work, a lot of kind of repetition. He also has a unique approach to studying, which I thought was interesting, where he has kind of big study days, and there's a full day on one spot, whereas other players might study 1 hour, 2 hours before their grinds. Again, it's what works for him, but I thought it was very interesting that he's found this kind of it allows him to go deep and as far as he wants to with studying without compromising his grinding, and that's having alternated days. So I really liked all his approach in terms of mindset. I think he's got a very balanced, solid mindset. To say he has no gambling tendencies as an MTT player, I think is actually a bit of a superpower, because most players gravitate towards MTTs because they have a little bit of gamble in them. So to not have that, I think could give him an edge in a lot of scenarios, especially with expectations getting high with big fields. So lots of good stuff, and I wrote a lot more notes, but they're the main ones. How about yourself, Rene? What are the main takeaways for you?
I think he has the ability to be very reflective on himself and try to come up with improvements. He didn't really talk about deliberate practices or anything, but for example, what you were saying, that he noticed that he would get very upset because he might have had big expectations, and then he reflected on it. Well, how can I come up with a new mindset that would alleviate me from the pain that I'm currently feeling, right? So I feel like he's been very reflective and finding ways to adjust his routines and the way he does it, his mindset, in order to have a more enjoyable ride, I guess we could say it. So definitely shout out to Alex for how he has improved over the years. Some things that I wrote down is enjoying solving the puzzle. He's definitely very curious, right? Some people, when knockout tournaments came out, they might be like, oh shit, another format to study. I finally felt like I started to get a handle of MTTs, but he was very, very curious. He loves solving the puzzle. So for him, a new format, that's great. He mentioned study the bigger pictures and be aware if you go too deep into the nuances. This was also a question that I kind of interrupted Adam on, like, how do we then deal with perfectionism? He said, well, if you go too much into the specific weeds of like a specific spot, be wary and go back to like, what was the bigger picture of this spot? Because that's what you want to know. You want to kind of understand the mechanics. The ability to convert bounties into chips, that was kind of, I think, the main takeaway from the adjustments you have to make in knockout tournaments. So how much is a bounty now worth, and how can I convert that to chips, and then kind of now see how much chips am I actually risking to win how much, right? Because in the end, then it becomes sort of a normal tournament again. So that was, I think, kind of the main takeaway, regardless of if it was a normal bounty, a progressive bounty, a mystery bounty. It kind of came back to this main principle. He also mentioned about not over adjusting versus specific player profiles. I think this he answered when I asked him about common leaks. And then he said, like, people now stop hero calling completely versus a nit, and always call versus a guy who's very aggressive, but it's a bit more nuanced to that. So I thought that was actually pretty valuable advice as well. Definitely something that I can personally relate to. And in terms of studying, we can also see that he got coached by Gaftekel, because I think Gaftekel said exactly the same thing. He said you have to study spots that are frequent or very high in EV. So frequent, he talked about big blind defense, pot and open spots, and high in EV, he talked about, for example, final table, ICM. Overall, a lot of great knowledge. Thank you very much, Alex, for coming on and sharing this with our audience. I want to thank Adam for asking bright questions, as always, best co-host in the poker industry. I want to thank the audience for listening to this episode all the way to the end. I want to thank our sponsor, GTOWizard Universal. And if you liked this podcast, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and I will see you guys in the next episode.